Funded meaning?
More people are getting healthcare coverage, and the indicators are improving for maternal health, for I think even child mortality. So you've got critical indicators that are improving despite the MCAs who are always doing benchmarking in other countries and wasting our money, despite the corruption. So county governments, then you look at access to services, access to water, you look at access to healthcare, access to early childhood education. That has deepened. There are parts of this country that did not have national government presence. Did you go to Turkana, for instance? If you had gone to the northeastern...
I have been to Turkana.
Yes. If you had gone before 2013 and you go now, it's like a different world. Marsabit, same thing. Go to the northeastern...
So there's improvement.
There are places that did not have national government presence. Now, the people who have lost marginally are counties like Nairobi.
The urban counties.
The urban counties. Not
the
all.
erstwhile developed counties.
Well, I think it's definitely an interesting debate, because at this point you're looking to Nairobi at one point or another to raise the profile of the entire country by virtue of the fact that it is a capital city.
Right.
And then you're looking at a regional hub at the same time. So Nairobi cannot continue to be in the limbo that it has been in the last, 12 or so months. Even when there was a governor at the seat, there were still complaints. So I think that is where the drive comes from, because you're looking at a city above other cities. If you want to look at the country itself, if you want to look at the region where Kenya, of course, is a powerhouse, you don't want to see that the profile of the city has been lowered in the manner in which it has been.
Absolutely, and
that's the crux of the matter here.
I would have loved if this would have happened from the word go, that when we were having devolution being put into actualized, they wouldn't have allowed all the services that are delivered to the people in Nairobi, and by extension even the look of the country to the international world. I would have hoped that they would have considered all that and
46
not just,
counties and Nairobi.
Yes, and not piled it all on one governor who clearly might have been overwhelmed with his capacity in terms of delivery.
He signed away. He signed it away yesterday.
Yeah.
No, it's not his to sign away.
It's
he
not
may have
his.
done that. Whether it holds up in court, whether this process will actually hold up is a different question. He may have signed it. This is Sonko. He's a maverick. He's outside.
No, not just that, Wanjiru. I mean, there was the Attorney General of the Republic who understands the law. You've got the Solicitor General. All this, the national government had proper legal advice on this.
To go ahead.
So they must have looked also at the law. The same constitution that we're arguing about is the same one that they've used. And they've quoted it in that Gazette notice properly and said, look, this is what the constitution allows us to do. So we are allowed to actually have a conversation between the two levels of government and transfer some powers. Now, the procedure is the other issue. It takes place within 14 days, and then they shall be notified to the National Assembly, and therefore it shall also be notified to the County Assembly. There shall be public participation. So all that has been captured in the Gazette notice. The thing is, where is the cart? Where is the horse?
Exactly. Have they signed?
They've already signed.
It's been signed.
How do you publish a Gazette notice and then have public participation?
Yes.
So process is as much a question when you're discussing legality. So yes, national can transfer to counties. In fact, the argument has been local governments used to run primary level education. If you look at institutions, if you look at Kileleshwa Primary School, for instance, Kilimani Primary School, they're really run down. They were performing much better under the local authorities. National government can transfer management of primary schools to county governments and say, you used to do this, you're closer to the ground, you run them. But there is a process that must be followed. Equally, counties can transfer their functions. So it's not the issue of if they can, it's the process.
It's the process.
And process is also part of the constitutionally required. So
out of 25 marks, 20 marks goes to process.
No. If process is wrong, it's a zero-sum game.
But does process trump necessity? Because the city does need to run, and the delivery of services do need to be given. And we are told here on the Daily Nation's page 2, the story that's in line with that, they say the result, Mr. Sonko presented himself to City Hall as City Hall's Alpha and Omega, adopting unorthodox ways of leadership, and the result was service delivery suffered, revenue collection fell, mounds of garbage continued to deface the city, and the matatu madness and congestion in the central business district continued. The capital that controls almost 24% of Kenya's gross domestic product was literally staring at a full-blown crisis after years of running in autopilot mode. So when you weigh the two, procedure and how things should be done, and the actual reality on the ground, and the shame of this garbage and the look of the city, and we're saying that Nairobi is the face of Kenya to the international world, then what is more important?
Many cases that come to court are thrown out on procedure. Someone didn't follow the right procedure, someone put the horse before the cart, and believe me, that case will not move forward. Procedure is important. And if you look at what the Constitution states, the Constitution is actually very much about procedure. What happens before what is done before something is done. When you talk about public participation, the whole idea behind public participation was so that the people for whom this Constitution is supposed to work for have a say. So you have that public participation. That's what the BBI is trying to claim that they are doing. The rallies are supposed to be public participation.
Those are not, No.
If you really stretch the meaning of public participation.
Yeah, this is it.
Wow.
Yes.
If you stretch it to
If you really stretch it,
life,
it could be, because the public is there, they're
Yeah.
participating in listening to what they're being told. So, yes, it is.
And by acclamation, they're endorsing whatever has been said.
Yes, exactly.
Those are political rallies.
Yes, they are basically.
That's different
yeah.
from public
So then-
participation.
Then I would ask, then what is it? Is it a pact, an agreement, or is it something that literally binding by law?
This is
Again,
a deed.
again,
It's
procedure
gone.
here.
It's
It's
done.
gone, yes, but questions have been raised.
Yeah.
Is this an ad infinitum situation? Is it that they're going to do this forever and ever? Is it going to be there for a week? Is it going
Is it
to be
an
there for
intervention?
What exactly
Yes.
is it?
Exactly.
So it's clear. It's for a period of at least 2 years. There shall be an annual reporting to the National Assembly on the progress of this agreement, of this transfer of powers. Of course, the next point that's going to happen is we're going to notify the National Assembly and the County Assembly of Nairobi. We are also going to ensure that there is public participation on this.
Okay,
This,
procedure.
fait
What
accompli.
should have preceded? What should have
How
gone
should it-
before
should
the
it
other?
have
Should they have
happened?
signed this thing or had those discussions before signing?
We will have this discussion in detail between 7 and 8. And we're hoping to get some insight from lawyers. But also, of course, there'll be a lawyer who interprets it this way and another lawyer who interprets the same law in a different way. Just to hear, for example, does the law clearly stipulate the procedure? Or is it assumed that public participation shall begin and then we shall end with the signing of the deed? Or is it assumed at some point that because there is public participation, because it's not coming into effect for the next 14 days, within those 14 days, you have the opportunity for public participation?
Latif, there is no lacuna here. There is no gap in terms of the interpretation of public participation. And the idea that an agreement has been signed before public participation has taken place, before this provision has been taken to the county assembly, in itself is problematic. And are there provisions in law? Yes, there are provisions in law. When a county is not performing, there are mechanisms that can be instituted to save the county. So national government can step in, but there is a mechanism. And there are safeguards to ensure we do not re-centralize. National government cannot take over, but they can step in if there is financial mismanagement.
Yep.
Right.
In a situation where the governor, where we don't have a governor, we don't have a deputy, what the speaker should have done is invoke the provisions to take us into
An election.
So the thing is, there are safeguards. This is a bit unusual, because of the fact that it's a court order that has removed the governor from that position. But by the same token, how is he signing an agreement with the president? So this is illegal. And the Solicitor General and AG have given advice to the government, to the president, that has then been overturned by the courts. So it's about rule of law.
The governor is still in office. Yeah. He's still the governor of Nairobi. The governor is still able to reshuffle his cabinet and his chief officers.
And in this
That's
case,
why he's done that.
Right, and he says in this case he's not able to run things, as it were, and says, look, you know what, I need help, guys.
In reality, though, some of those functions that have been taken over have been run by the national government for the last 2 years.
That's not true.
The national, the city rehabilitation program has been running infrastructure projects.
That's not true. And whether that, and even if that has happened, has it been happening legally? Because it was challenged. In fact, the clerk the previous clerk, who is now under investigation, had
the county secretary.
No, the clerk of the county assembly had raised this issue with the national government and said, yes, you have a regeneration program. It is good to have a regeneration program where national and county governments work together. But there needs to be clarity, because the question becomes, who is accountable? Yeah. So the regeneration program in itself has been problematic. And so the point I want to bring here is about rule of law. And the other point I want to bring up here is that national government has a problem with Nairobi being run as a county. And they've stated that from the word go. There's a bill to re-centralize Nairobi, and that bill, has not been presented.
Do you feel it's justified, their concern?
Let's take a short break. Let's take a look at the weather, and then we come back and continue this conversation. This is a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation on Spice FM and KTN News. Let's take a break at 19 minutes past 6. Good morning.
Intelligent humor and nostalgic music.
Yes, that's part of the show. Yeah!
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi. Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise. Yeah!
You're listening to Spice FM.
We're looking at cloudy conditions in Nairobi today at 17 degrees currently. We'll see rain in the capital this afternoon with highs of 26 and lows of 17. In Nyeri at 16 degrees, mostly cloudy conditions. Rain expected later as well with highs of 23. It's partly cloudy in Kisumu at 22 degrees. Rain expected later as well, highs of 29. Malindi at 28 degrees, partly cloudy conditions to carry the day with highs of 32. 27 degrees in Mombasa, cloudy conditions, rain expected with highs of 33. It's partly cloudy and rain expected in the afternoon in Nakuru at 26 degrees the high, with standing currently at 17 degrees. Showers expected at 24 degrees the high in Eldoret, currently standing at 16 degrees. Further afield in East Africa, in Kampala at 22 degrees. It's a cloudy day and rains have already begun with highs of 28 and lows of 22. In Dar es Salaam at 27 degrees, it's partly cloudy conditions with highs of 21. An expectancy of showers later. Down south in Johannesburg at 13 degrees right now, highs of 26 and lows of 13. We're looking at partly cloudy conditions in Lagos through the day with highs of 35 and lows of 26. On towards Europe and London at 3 degrees, clear skies, highs of 8 and lows of 3. In Paris at 4 degrees, it's cloudy conditions, rain and snow expected later with highs of 8 and lows of 3. And finally in New York at 8 degrees, it's cloudy conditions through the day with highs of 10 and lows of 7.
Sugar and spice and
Mature, intelligent talk every morning.
A very good morning
Spice
to you
up
for just
yourself.
joining us. This is Spice FM and Morning Express Converged, rather. And I am Trix Ingada, joining CT Muga, Ndu Oko, Eric Latif, and, I forget her
Wajiro
name. Wajiro Gikonyo of the Institute of Social Accountability. And today we're taking a look at what's making headlines. And on Press Review, we've just talked about the biggest story that is predicting the beginning of the end of a wild Sonko era, as the Daily Nation is putting it. So, I mean, my question earlier on to Ms. Wajiro Gikonyo was that, is it justified that the national government is unwilling to have Nairobi as a devolved government on its own? I would feel that it should be part of the national, government, because of the hope that they would deliver services better than, what is happening right now. But then, is it a question of revenue? I would love your input on that.
Sorry, Trick. You have to throw that question one more time.
Do you feel that the national government is, justified in their unwillingness to have Nairobi as a separate, devolved, government, or is it, is it an issue of revenue? They just want more money, or is it that an issue that they would deliver better services to the people?
National government is struggling to implement its own functions. So let's start there.
Yeah.
In terms of their ability to deliver services to the people of Nairobi, I don't think that is really the question. It's not the question we want to ask. I think the question we need to ask is, what are the implications for the people of Nairobi? Because the purpose or the object of devolution is political. It's about political say. And the reason Kenyans pushed for devolution is so that we can have a say in terms of what the priorities are. Because under national government, the distance from a resident to the national government is way too high.
Yes.
So are Nairobians willing to give up their
power,
say?
basically?
Yes, it is. Their sovereignty, the exercise of sovereignty. Now, devolution is imperfect.
Right.
Nairobi County has been very imperfect, and there are safeguards in the Constitution and in the law regarding what should happen. For instance, this county should have been suspended because it can be suspended, and an interim board put in place to remedy what is not working. And then there's the possibility of either reinstituting the county or going into an election.
Right.
So there are safeguards that should have been invoked. So the decision to take over services really is a disenfranchisement of
The
Nairobian
people.
citizens.
Yeah, but then it's the same Nairobian citizens, and at the risk of sounding elitist, who chose the current leadership that is right there, And so there's the argument that, given the magnitude of this county, perhaps they should not be given that kind of power,
If you look at it the way you're looking at it, then that argument holds water. But if you look at our constitution, it actually allows for transfer of functions and powers between levels of government.
Yeah.
The county government is a government, the national government is a government.
But guys, the question that Trix is raising, though, is it justified to have that conversation of transferring the entire county government of Nairobi and make it a metropolitan area of the national government? We've seen it in Nigeria.
I've gone back to the constitution because that is the structure from which you can actually derive.
It is justified.
It's true, but the discussion is amending even that provision in the constitution and saying Nairobi shall have 46 counties.
Kenya should have 46, right?
Kenya shall have 46 counties, and then Nairobi shall be, a metropolitan area governed by the national government.
But you see, that's a totally different discussion, really.
Now, that's the discussion that Trix is raising.
Yes, and I'm saying
we've had that discussion. It's even contained in the BBI report.
There yet.
Well,
we are there.
I think we're right there because by virtue of what's going on right now, this discussion has come up many times. And apart from the fact that the discussion is there that services in the county have ground to a halt, it has been thrown in the ring that should we then have Nairobi operate as a protectorate of sorts?
Of the national
and I'm
government.
telling you that
government,
our constitution allows for transfer of powers within government.
Now, this is beyond the transfer of powers. The discussion that we are raising is beyond the transfer of
now
power.
We're saying beyond the transfer, the discussion has come into play that should it be removed permanently.
Can we,
so that we don't find ourselves
the
here.
thing is, we are mixing issues because there are two questions. Is this legal? is the first question.
Right.
The second question is this, should Nairobi County be, should the status then be changed? That's a constitutional conversation.
Yes.
So
But you
this,
see, if
this
it
this
is illegal,
what
then
is
it would lead to the constitutional
What I'm saying
conversation,
is we are here we need to take a position of rule of law. So even as we discuss, let us discuss within the legal framework. The only conversation we can have now is this legal or is it not
No,
legal? The other conversation, no.
I mean,
Why should this be the only conversation? We
hold
can
on.
have this other
because
conversation
one
as well.
would feed
No,
eventually
because
into
We
the
had
other.
it even in
by the way.
2010
Yeah.
when we were discussing the constitution, and before we went to the referendum for that constitution, that conversation was already being raised.
Right.
Should
I'm
we
not trying
have
to-
Nairobi as a county?
I am not trying
or
to
should we
temper
not?
freedom of speech. Yes, we can discuss that. But the actions of yesterday can only be discussed within the present legal framework. If we discuss those outside the legal framework, then what we're saying is that we entertain and accept abuse of rule of law. So the point I'm making is this. The national government has stepped in and Sonko has signed over powers. Are those powers his to sign? Is this a due process? That is the fundamental question regarding what happened yesterday. The other question, which is for us to now have a broader deliberation, which is what BBI is bringing up, is should Nairobi County be a county like others? So, if we start mixing issues, then really we are then also part of the problem in that we are not regarding the rule, the
I don't think
constitution.
it's mixing
So-
of
We are
issues,
discussing-
but rather there's a larger conversation.
We are
to be
discussing an
had.
issue that is already
Yeah.
mixed.
Yeah.
Okay?
No,
Because-
let's not mix it further. So what I'm
No.
saying, for us to have a coherent conversation, it's useful for us to then say, okay, is this a lawful process? And what else needs to happen within this process to ensure it
Actually,
upholds rule of law?
the Constitution supports you on that because it says for this transfer of powers, one of the conditions is that the transfer of the functions of power is not prohibited
Right.
by the legislation under which it is to be performed or exercised. So the Constitution supports you. Now, the Constitution places the burden of ensuring that it's within the constitutional umbrella on the national government. They are the ones who should ensure. Let me read it for you. Constitutional responsibility for the performance of the function or exercise of the powers shall remain with the government to which it is assigned by the 4th schedule. Arrangements shall be put in place to ensure that resources necessary for the power performance of the function of the exercise of the powers are transferred. Now, all I'm saying is this. The Constitution gives you a clear roadmap as to how this should be done. Now, what is clear is that what is legislated about this is what, and again, as Wanjiru puts it, this is probably what we need to look at. And since I'm not a lawyer, I can only read what is written and say this is what I understand it to be. Now, there are people who I think understand these things a lot better than we do. What the Constitution doesn't tell you, it doesn't. And this is why even when you have a constitution, you have to take it a step further for it to be actually become a functioning legal, yes.
There's in the Intergovernmental Relations Act,
Yes.
those provisions are then given
Arms and legs,
legislative provision.
Yes.
And the provisions that are given is that there is a provision for suspension, and there is a provision for when a county is in crisis, a special board can be set up to take over the functions. So actually, it would be important to look at if this Gazette notice has fallen into that provision. But the board being set up would then be the one to assess the situation, what has gone wrong, where are the gaps, what needs to be done, and then make recommendations to the government, to the national government. Actually, the suspension of a government, the president has a critical role in that they receive the report from the special board with regard to the steps that need to be taken. Yeah. So what has happened here is the national government has really just ignored that provision. There's also another provision where county can transfer its powers. And I think that's the provision they're working under.
So
where county can say, look, we can't manage this function, let us transfer it to the national government. But Then comes back the issue of process. What is the due process? And the law does lay down a process. And what they've done here is they've turned the process backwards by first signing the agreement and then saying in 14 days the National Assembly, County Assembly and citizens will have a say. That is not public participation.
We'll have this conversation again
coup.
in detail between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. and we'll be calling in some lawyers who understand matters of devolution. Peter Wanyama is one of them. He's lined up. He's going to be joining us in this conversation. So we'll be looking at it. And I'll be raising the issue and saying whatever the process, whatever everything has been done, it's undemocratic. That's what I'll be saying. What happened yesterday in State House is undemocratic. It usurps the power from the people of Nairobi County. Good morning. It's 27 minutes to 7 o'clock. This is a Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation, broadcasting on Spice FM and KTN News. Let's take a look at traffic.
Spice FM, Nakuru.
All right, Wednesday morning, definitely the middle of the week. Let's see what it looks like on Thika Road, Safari Park. It starts as far back as there. Mombasa Road also as far back as the Gateway Mall. It is already bumper to bumper. It's really terrible traffic if you go back to see what's going on Thika Road. Understanding, of course, that a lot of the footbridges are being worked on right now, so that definitely affects traffic. From the tunnel to the CBD is absolutely clear, though. No traffic there, and of course that joins to Limuru Road. The early birds are enjoying the roads, but now we are seeing that we already have a bumper-to-bumper situation. We'll take a look at Langata Road and Ngong Road and what might be happening there. We're reminded by the ferry services in Mombasa that five ferries are up for service this morning, and that should help crossing between the island and of course the mainland in Mombasa. All right, Waiyaki Way from Nairobi to Uthiru, outward bound, no problems there. Inward bound, however, we do have a bit of traffic starting as far back as Kangemi. We'll see what that looks like in a short while, but it's just opening up now. We'll see in a bit how it looks. Spice FMKE is how you can reach us on Twitter. Let us know what you see. The bypasses are open though. Those you can use right now. We'll see what it looks like shortly.
The 90s have never sounded so
Our
good.
favorite songs of the 1990s.
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi. Mature, intelligent talk every morning.
Very good
Spice up
morning
yourself.
to you, wherever you're catching us from. This is Morning Express. I'm Trix Ingado joining the folks at Spice FM, not Spikes FM.
It's the Tricks,
yeah,
we'll get it.
It's the Tricks, yeah. So we are with Wanjiko Gikonyo, the executive... Wanjiro Gikonyo, sorry. Who's the executive director, sorry. Institute of Social Accountability. City Muga, Eric Latif, Andu Oko. And we are taking a look at what's making headlines this morning. There's a big story on the Standard that shifts, or rather moves slightly away from the unusual politics. On page 2 and 3, you're told about the 10 trillion shilling economy with 46 million poor people. False hope is the question that's being asked. Statistics suggest Kenya's economy is soaring, but the numbers do not add up. And on the ground, where an overwhelming majority of citizens are classified as poor and vulnerable, and they go further to classify the indicators of the poverty that we are experiencing. 34% households are connected to electricity. Only 40% Kenyans have piped water. 97.5% of is the percentage of the 55 million accounts with over 100,000 shillings. And then we have 132,519 are those taking home more than 100K a month. Only 139,519 people. So what do you make of these statistics?
Damning, as they say, right?
Yeah.
It isn't damning, it's just realistic.
Reality.
This is what it is on the
What
ground.
it's saying is that 45.7 million out of the 47.6 million Kenyans are either poor or on the brink of poverty.
Yes, it's just that they don't realize they're poor, but they are poor.
Yeah.
It's just like we keep saying that we're a second-tier nation and we are a third-world banana republic.
Backward,
Yes,
dark, black.
but we actually
Add those other adjectives.
Yes, but we actually don't understand it. And the people who want to tell us that we move to the second tier do so for their benefits.
And I think the thing is, we often we tend to think of poverty as, you're begging, you don't have in your hand, you're not able to get 3 meals a day. But you want to actually look at poverty as compared to the ability or the potential that a country then has to spend or earn, right? So that if you're going to put one against the other, then truth be told, the majority of the people in this country are poor.
I'll go back to the Constitution, because one of the biggest tenets of the Constitution is economic inclusion, equality, because Kenya is one of the most unequal countries in the world. So this is not a surprise. The tragedy is that 10 years, almost 10 years after the passage of the Constitution, we're still having this conversation. Because the big driver behind constitutional reform was that resources must be spread all through the country. And then, of course, there are provisions for socioeconomic inclusion. I'll go back to politics. At the end of the day, our constitution is a revolution. It's a bloodless coup. It's probably not bloodless. People died because of the constitution, but it is a revolution that seeks to undermine the foundations of this inequality. But then we have an administration that is blind to this constitution. They are blind to devolution. They don't support it. They are blind. For instance, we have an equalization fund that is supposed to go to counties that are especially marginalized. That fund has not been disbursed from the national level. County governments, devolution is supposed to deepen access to services. And if you deepen access to services, then you alleviate poverty to an extent, because it means then you have less out-of-pocket payments, let's say, for healthcare. Kenyans are still going out of pocket for healthcare because, for instance, health is getting about 6% of the national budget. It's supposed to be getting 15% of the national government of the national budget. So the problem, what this is really what BBI should have been addressing. Actually, BBI should have been addressing 2017, what happened to the institutions that were supposed to safeguard the election, and how are they manipulated? Question number one. Question number two is economic inclusion. Really just asking the question, how do we redress this? Inequality is rooted in access to land. So the Dongo report, the Truth and Justice report are critical. Because, for instance, in Nairobi, 2/3 of people work in the informal sector. So if you work in the informal sector, especially under the regeneration program we were discussing, they are the ones who are instituting the evictions of informal traders. Because informal traders, 2/3 of people working in Nairobi have no right to trade, have no space to trade. How will you then not have inequality? So about 80% of Kenya's income earners are in the informal sector. A good number of them are in agriculture. But those in urban areas do not have access to the basic to the basic needs to have a living that will allow them to get out of poverty. So they are what are called subsistence jobs. So as government says, well, we're creating jobs, they're creating survivalist jobs that people do just so that they can eat that one meal a day. So what I'm saying...
But we, the revolutionaries who came up with this constitution, because it was we, the people, Are you saying that we have abandoned our job then? Did we come up with a constitution and then now we sit back and start pointing fingers at the administration, the government? What is the role of?
It was hijacked. If you're talking about devolution, and say, let's talk about health. The percentage of money that should actually be in the county, let me reverse it. The bulk of any health budget is still with the Ministry of Health.
At the national level.
And yet it's a devolved function. So what exactly have they devolved?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that's the point I'm raising. We need to head back and start asking ourselves, do we understand what we want?
Can we interrogate that statement, Eric? Because what City is telling us, health is a devolved function.
Yes.
It is to be implemented by counties. Yet, the money majority of the money is still
at the national level,
with
the policy guys,
yes,
who are not supposed to be the implementers.
Exactly. So how and despite that, health outcomes are improving marginally. Despite that, simply because at the little money that counties get, they must implement at the local level. Why? Because citizens are there. Where is the governor going to go? It's not like there's demand.
Stronger demand and accountability.
There's stronger oversight. By virtue of you're there. The county assembly member is there. There's nowhere you're going to go. They are locals.
Yes.
This is the strength of our very imperfect devolution that has been under-resourced because national government is holding the money. Right. Despite that, we have marginal gains. What if there was more money? Right. Yes, they would steal a little bit more, but we would still get better services. And what I'm saying is we must deal with corruption, but the problem with Kenyans is we mix corruption and governance and sovereignty.
Right.
So I really like what City said. Let's ask, where is the money? How has it been used? And then you'll get the story. The problem is we are still under a central government. We never devolved. And central government is entrepreneuring instead of doing development.
We behave sometimes like this government is operating from somewhere in Mars. We
It actually is.
We elect this national government.
It actually is. In fact, Mars is close by.
The same way.
Choose another planet that is really far.
The same way we are the ones who elect the county government, and we demand a lot of accountability from that. It's the same way we should be demanding accountability from the national government. But this thing of behaving as if the national government is this giant ogre that we cannot question, but we can only question the local MC and governor. I think we need to take responsibility.
Well, I do think that questions need to be asked across board. If you're going to ask at the local level, you need to then be able to ask as far up as is necessary. Because when we talk about agitation doesn't only then exist at a certain level. It must then be able to permeate through all levels to the very top. The question that you should be able to ask or demand of your MCA, you should be able to demand of your president. You should be able to. And we're saying, obviously, very clearly that should happen. If we can bounce off of this, still talking health matters, and then go to another area which is very, very important. We talked about this very briefly yesterday when we talked about the fact that the Hajj is coming up this year, of course, the pilgrimage to Mecca. And then we hear reported as breaking news by Agence France Presse yesterday that Iran's health minister...
what was that again?
Agence France Presse, the French news agency.
Right.
Iran deputy...
I'm going to throw a little conspiracy here. Africans just tend to die in large numbers anyway. So you're not really sure whether it's poverty that has killed this person. Because if you're exhibiting a fever, is it malaria?
Or stress?
What I'm trying to say is this. And then African governments also have a tendency of misinforming their own public. So just like the Iranians were keeping that information, and China for the longest time actually refused to face the reality of this disease, there is that possibility. Let me be kind and say there is that remote possibility
that we have
coronavirus in Africa, but African governments are not aware.
African governments, they will talk about it if there's clarity that WHO and other world bodies are going to give money. Then they'll talk about it.
Okay, and then there's on the back page of the Standard, we're told
totally
corona.
Interesting, but I'm not sure it's founded.
On the back page of the Standard, you're told coronavirus now threatens Tokyo Olympics, and they're now telling us to move the place is difficult because there are a few places in the world that could think of gearing up facilities in that short time to put something on hold. But with an event of that magnitude, what do you do?
The Olympics are going to be cancelled.
No, look, we took Japan has has been in preparation for the last 4 years. Of course, 2 years ago, they told the world that they were ready.
And it's not far from...
And they did a fantastic job in terms of preparation for this. So they were ready. So you can imagine then asking another country to basically in the next 3 months be Olympic ready and host the game.
Not only that.
And
but
then asking them to host,
it won't be
how do you
possible.
stop
Just
the...
postpone the games to next year.
Yes, do. South Korea haven't shut down in the way that China has. Okay? They have an increasing number of people who are reported to be infected. What is clear about this virus is that it's not only agile, okay? It's very democratic. You actually do not know where it's going to spring next. All right?
Yes.
So, and someone
But it's racist.
No, this one, not
It's
yet.
not in Africa.
For once, we don't.
Wait,
we don't
are you
complain.
complaining?
For once, that's not a problem.
Yeah, and it's not a question of where. It's a
So
question
you're saying,
of,
so Ebola is also equally racist?
Yes.
yeah. And I think it's not a question of where in the world it's being hosted. It's the fact that people travel from
Other
everywhere
places
and
to the yes,
converge
yes,
this place.
yes.
Yeah, you know?
Absolutely. So I do see, and and this is why I was saying, if you see world events like this, and I think Japan did give a call at some point in the beginning of this month and said, look, from what we are seeing, it is possible that these games will not be held. And of course, like I said, it is not possible for another country 3 months to the games to be
If
able
it's
to
not
then host.
contained by...
If it's not
numbers of
contained in the
countries-
next 1 month, forget about it.
The
no
number
point
of
of having-
There's no
countries
point.
that are reporting the evidence of the virus is increasing, not decreasing.
This is what I said yesterday was in terms of more significant confirmed cases. Yesterday was quite interesting because then across board we saw breaking news coming out in pockets. More cases having been confirmed. Of course, the Iranian health minister then confirmed with this, and this is what has been announced, right? We don't know what else. And of course, we saw that another 107 cases out of
What is
Wuhan.
interesting, with all the preparedness,
Of
many of the
deaths.
cases we are hearing reported of the existence of people exhibiting the symptoms of this disease, Europe.
Exactly. This is where the new cases
And
are
not
coming out.
third world Europe.
Yeah.
No. First world Europe.
First world Europe.
Yes.
I think it's
Like
because of the
Switzerland.
travel patterns, probably.
Look, what is certain about this disease or this virus is that was certain even about HIV. A lot of speculation, a lot of what people think they know, but they're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
It's still being figured out. And if you look at the strict manner in which China has managed it, they know a lot more about this disease than anybody else.
And they know more than they're going to tell everybody else as
But
well.
of course they do.
Yes, yes.
Because these measures, shutting down their own economy. Now the Americans are burying their heads in the sand, like the Iranians.
Yeah.
They're also saying, no, they don't need to shut down. They don't need, they think they don't need to do. Yet they also have numbers. Remember, 28,000 US soldiers are in South Korea. Okay, now, it's not as though they sit in the barracks the whole day.
They
Yes, they move around.
Yep.
You also have, Eric, you really must stop coughing when we're talking about this.
Honestly, I need to pick another time.
Cough after
Give
the
it
show.
about 7 minutes.
schedule your cough for later.
Yes,
think
in line with the Constitution.
Just
Yes.
reminding you.
City, one of the potential ramifications, because of course at some point it looked like there was a downturn, like
Yes.
this, the spread had peaked and wasn't going to really get bad. But then now the news coming out this week is that possibly there's another upsurge. And sorry to get very technical about this, is the economic impact. Because countries are going to have to close, their borders. People are, events have to be cancelled.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the global economic impact and what it's going to do to us and every
big.
other country.
Yeah.
It's
And
heavy. Very many countries already
But it's
recording
begun.
losses.
Yeah,
The airline
yeah,
industry has already recorded. They're going to have
They're
over
making losses
$50 billion
with every
dollars.
single day.
Right.
They're
Right.
making losses.
Absolutely.
tourism
And-
industry for those countries that depend on tourism. Even China itself, Japan.
I challenge anyone to show me
the UK,
a
Kenya.
country that is not economically linked to China.
It's a bit difficult to do that.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So
And you
the
know-
fallout is...
It's major.
gonna be major.
Country like ours, we've got lots of loans that we have borrowed and, of course, are struggling to pay. And anything that affects our economy or anything that affects the economies of those countries that we borrowed from, because we have a lot of commercial borrowing, is going to impact on us. So this, I don't think we've even begun to analyze the impacts of this disease.
The way we should.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of it, the disease is still being politicized. Instead of it just being an epidemiological issue, people are still making statements that politicians
would.
Yes, exactly. And this is not something you politicize.
No.
You handle it
Yes.
as it is.
When you have a situation where even people who we are told are prepared are suddenly telling you, we are not as prepared as we thought we were. All right? One of the complaints that you hear coming out of the northern part of Italy is that they now have a problem with the doctors who are actually falling sick because of fatigue. They're overwhelmed. Yes, they are overwhelmed. Now, when doctors get overwhelmed, and these are people who are trained to be overwhelmed, what do you think is happening? They have more cases than they are able to manage, and yet they have healthcare systems that are actually prepared for such things.
Sophisticated.
Now, let's thank God on our knees that it hasn't hit here.
Or more. Stronger.
Or more. Before we come to the close of the hour, City, there's a story here, of course, that will interest you. Colleges in Kenya to benefit from 4 billion funding deal with Germany. The president of Germany, of course, was here. Yesterday, he was at the Kiambu Institute of Science and Technology. Germany has been working with Kenya in promoting, technical courses in Kenya, and that's why they were going there and saying they're going to give us some funds.
The 4 billion is to go for some of these technical colleges that already exist, okay, and they're all over the landscape. No one is talking about the technical university that German promised to give us, and our people did what they seem to do best, bungled it.
But they won't talk about it now because they know they
No,
bungled
it has to be talked about because it was offered, a full university. Somehow we haven't gotten around to signing it because people don't seem to determine, should it be built here, You've been given a university.
Who cares where you put it, man?
Put it somewhere.
There are people.
Well, the politics of the country.
It matters where you put it.
Oh no, it matters a great deal where it is put. Doesn't it just?
and there's another side to this story because when you look at the role of technical universities,
yes,
in the face of what we were discussing earlier about about 80% of employed being in the informal sector.
Yep.
When you look at trying to close inequality, you want to have access to education and access to trade and skills being, evenly spread. So TVET, these technical institutions are really important.
Yeah.
And they've been a key part of government policy. But when it comes to the crunch, government is not putting money in TVET.
Nope.
Actually, the only money going to TVET is money that's borrowed.
Or money that's given.
Yeah, or money that's given.
Not our own money. No.
Yeah.
It's not our own money.
We don't finance government. All our government is financed externally.
Right. No.
We talked about healthcare yesterday.
We shouldn't.
Now here
we shouldn't accept that. That is not how it. That's actually an economic insecurity. That's irresponsible economic management. Any government in that situation does not deserve to be in government, and we know that. But that is the truth. That is the truth. Yes. Security is the first primary business of a government: the security of its people, human security, economic security, food security. So food security. So right now we are saying great to the Germans. Thank you very much. But national government is paying lip service to the young people of this country because it's not putting money where it needs to. And we, at the end of the day, the consequences of the underfunding of these sectors is going to hit us not just tomorrow, not just next year, but in the long run.
No.
And we're talking about
it's already hitting us.
Yeah.
When we have key installations like when we had with the pipeline, we had to get expertise from outside the country.
Yeah.
Pipeline, a pipe is a pipe. We've had polytechnics for the longest time. We now call them universities. But if you understand what it is that has been invested, and you are right, they are still polytechnics. Nothing wrong with it being a polytechnic, but our polytechnics for the longest time were institutions of excellence.
Right.
It looks
Even
like we
better
engage,
than unis,
it's like we engage some reverse gear at some point or the other.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then now we're talking about 100% transition. We're going to have more
And the things we
At that
say.
level. Trix Ngado, thank you very much for joining us again this morning. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you
very much for joining us on KTN News. We're going to the top of the hour. Then, of course, Trix will be leaving us. We'll be left with Wanjiro Gikonyo, CT Muga, Nduoko, and myself, Eric Latif. Keep it right here because for the next 1 hour, 7 to 8, we'll be discussing the Nairobi County Government government, and now that some of these functions have been transferred to the national government, what that means. We'll be joined by lawyer Peter Wanyama, who will be joining us on phone. And then 8 to 9, when Jiro Gekonyo will be raising the issue of ballooning public debt. Of course, we'll be discussing that and how we are faring on that front. And then 9 to 10, we'll be joined by an economist. This is Wangari Moikia. She's a public finance management expert. We'll be talking about how we can manage our debt, our growing debt. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. Good morning. It's 7 o'clock.
In the middle of traffic hour, things are happening. All right, all the way from Kitengela. Prepare for a massive jam in Kitengela today because the bridge is going to start being, actually from today until the next few days, because preparations have begun for the reconstruction of the Kitengela bridge between the 3rd and the 13th of March. So that means that traffic coming then down from on that part of Mombasa Road will definitely be affected. Kiambu Road is total madness this morning. 5 lanes from Ridgeways outbound already. This means that we will definitely see traffic then joining Thika Road with a great deal of problems. Gong Road all the way to town, still looking very good. No incidents or accidents for now. Let's see what that looks like in just a short while. Thika Road is packing the punch this morning, all the way as far back as Roy Sambo, snaking slowly towards the CBD. It's a parking lot on Mombasa Road still, right around Syokimau. So where we look, there's traffic. Throw a stone and you're likely to land in a parking lot. We'll see what it looks like around the city in a short while. But for now, the eastern and southern bypasses are open. Spice FM KE, reach us on Twitter. Let us know what you see. It's Wednesday morning. Let's see how we can keep it moving.
This is the Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and elevated conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and
we're broadcasting the show on 94.4 in Nairobi, 102.5 in Kisumu, 7.9 in Mombasa, 96.0 in Nakuru, 96.7 Eldoret, 90.9 in Nyeri, 97.7 in Malindi. We also live stream this show on audiovisual, www.spicefm.co.ke. Watch us on YouTube. Spice FM KE is our channel. Also, you can watch us on our Facebook page, Spice FM KE. We are also live streaming on Twitter at Spice FM KE. Well, this is a Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. So, of course, we know what happened yesterday is the governor of Nairobi City County government and the president of the national government, President Uhuru Kenyatta, were there at State House with the Devolution Cabinet Secretary Eugene Wamalwa, and the governor and the Devolution CS signed the deed of transfer of some functions from the Nairobi City County government to the national government. And of course, this was gazetted, and the Gazette notice was published by the end of the day yesterday. It's already out. It stipulates that this is what is going to happen, some of the functions that have been transferred. And then it also says the process that's going to be followed from this point going forward. The National Assembly is going to be notified of this. The County Assembly of Nairobi is going to be notified of this. And then there shall be some public participation to ratify this before it takes effect after 14 days of the publication of that Gazette notice. So in the next 14 days, this is expected to actually now happen, to come to fruition. Now, the people of Nairobi have a constitutional guarantee of having a county government. The people of Nairobi have powers to go and elect a county government of Nairobi. They elect county assembly members. They also elect the head of the executive, that's the governor and the deputy. And they also give the powers to the governor to form a government. The people of Nairobi have been given powers by the constitution to determine how their county shall be run politically and economically. I'm raising the issue this morning that what we saw happening yesterday, yes, there have been conversations. Yes, we have had a governor who's had problems with the law, a governor who's been barred from accessing his office by the court, a governor who's, not been able to harness and run the affairs of the county government of Nairobi well, according to very many people who argue that way, those who say that it was about time. But I'm looking at it from the point of democracy. The people of Nairobi who woke up to go and vote and elect a new government in 2017 have been shortchanged here. The people of Nairobi have not been asked whether they accept to transfer some of the functions of their government to another government. And I'm saying it was undemocratic. Whatever happened at State House yesterday was undemocratic. What should have happened? You should have had a direct vote by the people to accept or reject any proposal to transfer their functions.
A direct vote by the people. Eric, it's really great how you're creating law as you go along. There's no provision for a direct vote on functions, but there are legal provisions. So I totally support you. It's about democracy. It's about representation. And if we talk about representation, what went wrong with Sonko? That was the question I think that was asked. What did Nairobians do? How culpable are we in electing Sonko?
Yep.
And I think if we go back to that point, it underlines the problem that we have.
Do we really want to ask that question?
Well, we have to ask it. We have to ask
that
it.
way. I think let's go. If we're going to go down that hole, let's go that way, because it has been said time and time again that there was something of appeal that Sonko had to the people of Nairobi. 800,000 votes is not a joke, right? People saw that there was something within now. It's interesting to note that I don't think that they were looking at the profile of Nairobi when they were casting their vote. They were looking at an appeal that he had to the personal, in the way in which he had carried out himself previously. And if we want to look deeper at the problems, people had then problems of their own economic status, socioeconomic status, and things that they needed, which they were not able to access. Of course, then giving credence to the fact that, on a whole, the government had not been doing what it needed to do for its people, if we're going to look at Nairobi alone. So in this man, there was a solution that they felt that this is somebody that they could touch at some point who would be able to solve problems. Because we saw the problems that he was able to solve, paying hospital bills for people getting them out of hospital when they were not able to do it for themselves, paying bills for people then who were not able to bury their dead, paying school fees for people.
He resonated with people's
that is
needs.
what people resonated with. A need that they had at that point that this individual then was able to sort out for them. So as he rose in the ranks of governance, at this point now he said, okay, you know what? I want to run for governor. And this is what people remembered. He is a man who was able to meet needs, and they voted for him based on that. That decision was not about Nairobi and its profile. It was not about national government. It was not about devolution. It was not about looking at the profile of the country on a larger scale.
About the people and
it was about
representation.
their representation at that point.
And for their immediate needs.
Yes.
These long-term goals, lofty goals that the government tells us, they are said so often and they are not actioned so often, they might as well be fairy tales.
People don't even think about them. People don't regard them. Now, when they're making a decision as critical as putting someone in power, you can imagine.
Who
It's
can
not
you relate
regarded-
to?
Then this
Sonko.
guy.
Can I put it?
All those things
can
are
I
not
ask a
regarded at all.
question
Yes.
about that very process? We have a vetting mechanism anticipated in the Constitution of Kenya. We have Chapter 6, and there are certain standards a candidate is supposed to meet at the very basic.
Yes.
So the extent to which that framework has been undermined, not implemented, also contributes to this problem. So the point I'm making is that much like the problem we're in now has larger ramifications beyond Nairobi, so does the election of Sonko. Sonko should not have been on that ticket because of his background with the law. Chapter 6 provisions actually say if you're convicted of a crime, you're not eligible for public office. How did he get his vetting clearance? Which political party? And in fact, to its credit, Jubilee political party tried to, were not in favor of
having
Sonko. But because
But the people wanted Sonko.
The people want. We must remember, every conversation we are having now is about our democratic transition process. It's about how we transform the colonial state into a state that works for everybody. And the Constitution is a key part of that. And what the Constitution anticipated was, there's Chapter 6. All candidates must meet these requirements. Then you set up an IEBC, an Electoral Commission, an EACC, an Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, and these work in tandem to ensure that the candidates that get to state office and public office are of a certain caliber. Now that framework failed, and it began to fail under the coalition government, because when the Leadership and Integrity Act were being enacted, when the political parties and elections acts were being enacted, they were undermined. There were key provisions that were watered down. And so that you have candidates who are not eligible to getting into office because the electoral process is undermined and because...
They were passing through the cracks.
Right, but
Who
are the custodians of this process?
So the point I'm making is this. In our democratic transition, you want to move towards an inclusive, democratic, accountable governance framework where you have, the benefits are spread to the majority.
Yes.
You're moving from a situation where there are a few who benefit from the economic status quo. There will always be pushback. And there is then collateral damage. So my point is, so that I can wind up my thesis. My thesis is Nairobi is suffering from collateral damage of the failure to implement the provisions around the electoral process. And we also do not know in 2017 what happened.
What else happened?
So weak political parties, failure to implement the integrity provisions allowed Sonko on the ticket, from which point it was really a populist campaign.
But I must ask this question. Even if we say that Sonko had a criminal record, which makes him a criminal, what has that got to do with the management of the city? These are two different functions. Somebody can be a criminal but an excellent manager. And if we're using that yardstick and asking, how did we elect these people? Then let's ask the question of the presidency. How on earth did we elect those two fellows? Because they have shown us a degree of ineptitude that is actually groundbreaking and record-setting.
City, I'm surprised you say that. City, you're missing the point. The point is, the moment you're on the ticket, the moment you're nominated, Kenyans have no choice. The choice Kenyans have Kenyans have a choice.
Choices.
Hold on, let me put it this way.
More than one candidate.
And I'll tell you why they don't have a choice. Similar to 2017. Yes, we are culpable. We bought into the ethnic politics, but it's a chicken and egg
we always
question.
have the ethnic issue in our politics.
It's a chicken and egg. The moment you are nominated, your constituents then have the choice of voting you in or voting for the other person, because you have the front runner.
Yes.
Who nominates?
Parties.
The people.
So the point
it is actually members of a party who nominate.
No, so the
same electorate.
Yes.
A proportion of it nominates people.
Yes.
And then the larger
call it
population,
the delegates, whatever. But
the larger population comes and selects among all the nominated candidates. How many candidates did we have running for governor of Nairobi in 2017?
The point
800,000 people decided
that Sonko
deserves
the point
it.
is this. Yes, that is now the theory. That's the lofty ideal. It's the lofty ideal. No, because you're missing my point. You're missing my point. The point I am making is because
say it slowly.
Because the electoral process is flawed, because political parties are flawed.
Yes.
The nomination process is flawed.
Yes.
So
we agree.
that we are getting candidates who do not meet the standards at nomination level.
Human beings are
The
flawed.
moment they are nominated, the way our electoral process is framed, the big parties are the ones that are going to carry the day
Yes.
with national and possibly even the county level. So my thesis is this.
Having gone beyond that,
my point
because
is
we agree that yes, it was flawed.
Yes.
The
So
leadership
that-
and integrity
so I was then-
provisions were not adhered to. Yes. But that
That is
doesn't-
how we got Sonko. Otherwise, he would not
We
have been on the
also
ticket.
had
Not
other
just
tickets.
hold
We
on.
also
We
had
can't
other
take
candidates.
away.
That
we
cannot
can't
be the
take
only
away,
reason
no,
we had
we
Sonko.
can't take away from
No,
the fact.
and it is not just Sonko. There are so many candidates.
Yes.
There are many other candidates in state office who should not be in state office,
But
Yes.
who
they're there.
are undermining governance.
Yes,
but
no,
they're
and
there.
some of
Can
them are
we
working
first-
well.
can
Some of
we-
them are delivering.
No,
Yes.
can we first have an acknowledgement that you cannot build a democracy, you cannot build a democratic, economic, successful country if you have people in state office who are criminals.
We agree on
This
that.
is fine.
It's not
but
possible.
look, and
Lofty
it's also
ideals.
it's also
So,
not possible. If we look
Reality
at
is
No, it's
reality
not
is-
lofty.
He was
Lofty.
elected.
No,
Our
let's look at it.
politics
If we look
is
at-
working against us.
Okay.
That's
you know
the
what?
first point
Let's
we
look at
acknowledge.
that is
number
all right.
one.
But let's look at the 800,000 people. If we want to talk
voted.
about criminality and the other, the 800,000 people who voted, it is impossible for you to say that somebody went and put their hand on that ballot without knowing the history of this man.
And even if they didn't, or even
They
if
knew.
they did,
They knew.
Look,
And with what they were faced with, even taking into consideration that the gatekeepers or the custodians of this governance that we're talking about had failed in their responsibility to make sure that the right person, whomever that right person is on the ballot. If they had failed, that was not taken into consideration. What was taken into consideration was what resonated with them at that point, and that is what they used to make that decision, which also must be taken into consideration.
essentially,
it has to be.
We are putting
Okay.
democracy on trial here because the moment you say you are allowed to field candidates, people are allowed to present themselves, and they did, and then you tell the people, decide whom you want. Even if you told the Nairobians today that, okay, they were presented with Zongo's background, do you think they care? They don't give a toss.
Somebody is
And he was
meeting a
Nishimala
need
Tewa.
that you
They don't
have.
give a toss.
Somebody is meeting a need that you have that people previously have not been able to meet. It doesn't matter what backwoods you got this other individual out of. They're meeting a need. That is what they're going to make a decision about.
I agree
Which
with
is why
you,
I said
but
earlier
why
that
do
it
you
is a
start the
systemic.
discussion with the people?
It is a
Actually-
Why not say we have a broken political system, and Kenyans are playing in that broken political system where they say, I have one of two candidates. This one is elitist. This one is
Populist.
represents me. Not even populist. It's for the people. Yeah, because that's the language. Really, the vote for Sonko was a vote for somebody who represents the people, right? So it is, yes, the people add, because they picked Sonko, they voted for whoever else implicated in drugs deals and all of that. So there is that weakness. But the point I'm making is that until we fix our electoral system, we will continue having
It's
this
fine.
problem. So it's not the
fine.
people.
No.
It's-
It is the people.
It is the people.
So
It
the
is the
people are
people.
going to fix the
Electoral-
electoral process.
Yes.
Who should fix it though?
Yes.
No, because the people voted for a constitution
The
that
people
fixed it.
could
Do you see what
reject-
I'm saying?
Yes, and the same people could also reject any candidate. The same people could also
Why-
demand
Why
a
would I
change.
go to the ballot and reject my populist candidate at the cost of letting the elitist candidate
There
in?
you go. So
That
you
is
if
that
you,
is the
if you
that
don't
is
have a problem with the candidate, it does not matter. It's not about the system or
No.
the structure.
oh,
No.
it is about the system.
It's
No,
not
it
about the
Because-
system or the structure.
Wajiro.
The system and the structure are the people.
They are
The
managed
people
by
make
people anyway.
these systems and structures.
And these people are part and parcel of this broken country because they're all citizens of this country. We subscribe to the same norms, the same ethical values. We do. We also all pretend that we abhor the crimes that we see. We don't really. It's only terrible if someone else whom we are not aligned to is involved, and the likelihood of us benefiting from it doesn't seem clear.
yeah.
But I had a friend who corrected me, but today I'm going to go against that correction. We are actually a nation of thieves because there are those who steal on our behalf, and some of us are cheerleaders. We cheer along, and then we when asked, we're in the public glare, we pretend we actually do not like
We do
this
know
thing.
how we don't like
and
this.
yet,
It's
if
so
we
wrong.
look at our lives closely and honestly, we participate in those processes as well.
Back to my point, and my point this morning is it was undemocratic. We ought to have given the people of Nairobi the voice of choosing whether to transfer any of their functions to the national government. That is the point.
One last
you have
point.
A whole hour.
One last point
you have a,
on
you
that.
have a full hour. You
The-
have a
the
full hour. I've got to
argument-
go into this break.
Okay.
It's 20 minutes past 7 o'clock. This is a situation room. Kenya's biggest conversation. Shortly, we'll be talking to lawyer Peter Wanyama.
More of the timeless and greatest hits you love.
Warming up in Nairobi at 18 degrees, mostly cloudy conditions today and a rain expected later with highs of 26. 16 degrees in Nyeri. Of course, it's going to be a wet afternoon with highs of 23. Partly mostly cloudy conditions in Kisumu, rain already on the ground. 29 degrees the high, currently standing at 22. 28 degrees in Malindi, partly cloudy conditions through the day with highs of 32 and lows of 27. It's 27 degrees and mostly cloudy in Mombasa, rain expected later with highs of 33 and lows of 26. Rain expected later at 26 degrees the high in Nakuru currently with mostly cloudy conditions and 16 degrees. 16 degrees in Eldoret as well as 24 degrees the high with rain expected in the afternoon. In East Africa, cloudy conditions in Kampala, rain expected later, highs of 28 and lows of 22. Dar es Salaam is cloudy through the day as well, rain expected with highs of 32 and lows of 26. In Johannesburg at 13 degrees right now, mostly sunny conditions, highs of 27 and lows of 13. And wrapping things up in Lagos at 27 degrees, mostly cloudy conditions with highs of 35 and lows of 26.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
County government have been transferred to the national government, and now this is going to ensure that some services are now going to run by the national government. This is going to be subjected to some sort of undefined public participation. It's not defined, even in the legal notice, the Gazette notice that was issued, that this is how public participation shall happen. I'm saying, 800,000 people voted for a governor. More than 1 million people vote in Nairobi County. Those 1 million plus people need to be asked directly whether they want to transfer their powers. Yes, I know, Wajiro, you're going to tell me about the legal provisions, whether the law is on the side or not. I'm saying whatever legal provision we ought to have, we ought to have a legal provision that allows democracy to thrive.
I'm actually not even going there. I am actually going and saying I'm agreeing with there's an abrogation of what is actually legally and constitutional right. But in 2013, the then Minister for Constitutional Affairs was Mutula Kilonzo. And he was of the view that both Uhuru and Ruto were not eligible to be president. That was his view then. It was ignored. There were court orders. The recent one was that Miguna should be allowed into the country. It's been ignored. So if you have a history where the executive ignores court orders, so what do you think is going to happen to the rest of the country? What example has been set? It means that laws and rules are there to be abrogated. So if you then proceed to elect someone who by all accounts can be referred to as a thug, we Nairobians say that's the person we wanted, okay? And we are happy with him. So when you bring in the issues of management, we tell you, oh, okay, so what exactly do you think? And you tell us, we are now following this constitution that's not very clear, and we are taking over his powers. That is why I called it a coup.
It is a coup.
It is a coup. The powers of the people of Nairobi have actually
usurped.
Yes, it has.
Let's go to the phone lines and just talk to lawyer Peter Wanyama, who's joining us. Good morning, Peter.
Yeah, good morning, Eric.
How are you doing? And welcome to the Situation Room.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've actually been listening to the conversation since morning.
So joining actually from just the debate we were having before we went to the break on whether the structure was flawed from the very beginning.
Yeah, I think as Wajiru said, we have a problem with our political system. And in my view, I can explain it from a Platonic perspective. Plato said that a government should have leaders who are philosopher kings, and the persons who elect these leaders must be capable of making a rational decision. Now, the point is that if you don't have such a system, if the opposite is you have a government which is not a democratically elected government, but a demagoguery.
Yep.
A government of demagogues. So what you are witnessing in Nairobi is a flawed democratic system where, because of a cacophony of very many factors, you have then leaders who have less integrity. You have leaders who don't meet the constitutional threshold in terms of leadership and integrity. And then because the people cannot make a rational decision, you will find that they end up electing these leaders. Then we now get ourselves.
Are you suggesting that voters cannot make rational decisions as to who they should vote for?
No. I don't think the people of Nairobi, majority of the people of Nairobi, can make a rational decision on the quality of persons who deserve to be elected in certain positions.
What makes you say so?
Especially, majority of the voters who responded to the call by Governor Songo are not the elite, are not persons who, in terms of decision making, understand the importance.
Peter.
Really?
This is a rabbit hole, eh?
Absolutely.
We're looking. Are we saying that of the 1 million voters? Over 1 million voters in Nairobi.
80%
We're looking
of
at
them.
80% of them who chose this gentleman to be the governor of Nairobi. That you cannot count them as what you say as elite, and then not having the ability to make a rational decision.
Majority of them are not capable of making a rational decision based on the facts which are on the table. So you'll find they end up making decisions based on tribal.
What facts were on the table?
The facts which are on the table are this. They are qualifications for election of governor. Yeah, these qualifications are there in the constitution and elaborated in the statute.
Yep.
But because of our tribal nature and politics of clientelism, even the elite then are caught up in this mix. People make decisions based on certain orientation.
So did they make the decision based on tribe, or did they make the decision because they don't have the capacity to make a decision? Which one is it?
There are very many factors. There are very many factors at play. It is not one of those logical situations. There are many factors at play, and you can attribute it to very many factors. One is the inability to make a rational decision. Two, people making decisions based on tribal basis, and you can say that is usually a very hot issue. Sadly, sometimes people make decisions based on the euphoria of the moment.
Right.
Yeah. Like for instance, Jubilee carried the day, and you are in Nairobi. If you are not in Jubilee, then you can't be in ODM. So it is a euphoric political scenario. So we don't make rational decisions in our electoral process. And that to me directly contributes to the character and quality of the leaders that we have now.
Advocate Wanyama, habari yako?
Yes. I'm mzuri sana Wanjiru.
Yes, very good to hear you. And I'm in full agreement with you except about the rationality. I'll put it to you that politics really is emotive. It is not a rational, an entirely rational process. And I agree with you, especially when you started talking about, the role of the political system. The political system is supposed to temper those emotions. So you're supposed to have sufficient structural safeguards to allow those emotions to be expressed without falling to the level that we have. But also there were special circumstances, I think, around the 2017 election where the professional class voted for Sonko because the deputy was the governor, the presumed governor.
Right.
So there was a calculation that was made that badly backfired. And so we wound up in this situation and we fell prey to a centrist government, a situation of state capture as well, because these two are working together. And this is what is coming to play. So Advocate Wanyama, to what extent is the recentralization of this step a move towards recentralization, and what are the benefits or the incentives for the national government to take this step?
Yeah, national government first of all, national government has always wanted to take over devolved functions. As we speak, in my view, devolution is actually there. we don't have devolution as conceptualized in the Constitution, because the framework of governance that we have in the Constitution anticipated massive decentralization of functions. But if you look at in all the sectors, agriculture, water, environment, energy, trade and development, if you look at the policy, administrative intervention which have been put in place, and more importantly, legislation, from 2013 to 2020, you will see a trend where national government has taken over most of the devolved functions through policy and legislation. So what we have are actually very skeletal functions, and because of the systems which are at play at national government, because of established systems, they have established systems. Counties don't have capacity because their systems are skeletal. They don't have capacity, but more important, they don't have resources. Like the recent example of centralization of functions is on the universal health care. Health is a devolved function, but because it is an Agenda 4 item, the national government then has taken over most of the broader functions of the health sector by implementing this policy known as universal health care. And they have money to fund it. So they are funding it. Counties, as we speak, have signed agreements transferring
to be funded by the national government. Let's come back to the Nairobi issue before we take a short break.
Yes.
Peter, do you think it was procedural?
Now, the Nairobi issue, in my view, was not procedural, and I agree with you on something which most Kenyans are not looking at. The issue is, given the importance of the decision, must this decision be taken back to the people for approval?
Yeah.
Yes. So people are not looking at the law properly. If you look at the provisions of Section 90 of the County Government Act, there is an item known as matters which are supposed to be subjected to local referendum. In this case, a referendum conducted by the county government. And it says a county government may conduct a local referendum on, amongst other local issues, county laws and petitions, planning and investment decisions. Now, if you look at the fact that the national government is taking over a very, very critical function of the county government, which in this case is planning, then in my view, it should have started by approval from
the voters.
Approval from the voters. And how do you get approval from the voters? You do a referendum. The other way, the other mechanism is where you do a qualitative and meaningful public participation before you make the decision. And to me, that is where the decision starts. So that you generate the idea, the county executive committee approves that idea. It is taken to the county assembly because of its heavy implications and the fact that if you read the constitution, the county assembly has powers to oversight the executive. So they need to know what is going on, so they must approve. Then after that, you then generate the draft. And then you engage the other stakeholders as well, because if you look at the function of the Council of Governors, this is an issue which affects devolution.
Right.
And one of the functions of the Council of Governors in Section 19 of the Intergovernmental Relations Act is to look at and make a decision on this. And then this issue is picked up by the Intergovernmental Technical Relations Committee as an agenda for the summit. Because one of the functions of this intergovernmental the summit, the county government coordinating summit, which the president chairs, is to approve these decisions.
Yes.
And then after that, then you generate a draft. Then you sign the draft. And who is supposed to sign the draft? Again, that is legislated. Because I have seen this dialogue.
County government to the national government. Before we went to the break, Wajiro, you wanted to engage Advocate Peter on something.
Yes. Wanyama, I wanted to ask, of course, Nairobi is in disarray right now because of the governor's position with the courts. With the courts, lack of a deputy and all of that. So what are the options? Because obviously, what you're telling us is the process of transferring functions is a process. It would take time for it to be done properly. And Nairobians need services now. How viable would suspension of the county be? How viable would setting up the special, what are the provisions under the Constitution or the Intergovernmental Act when we have the kind of crisis Nairobi is facing, other than what is happening now, which is blatantly illegal?
I think there are two options in terms of resolving the problems in Nairobi. One is for the governor to complete the process of nominating the deputy governor. And I don't think that is prohibited by the court. If you look at the Court of Appeal decision on Governor Waititu and Governor Samburu, they were very clear that these persons remain governors. Even though they have stepped aside as a condition for bail, they have stepped aside. But they remain governors for all legal purposes, legal and constitutional purposes, only that they can't access the office and work from there. So it's a very confusing decision, but as it is, they remain governors, they can nominate, they can constitute a county executive committee. So the issue to me is what if they can borrow from what happened in Kiambu. When there's no governor, the deputy governor takes over.
Yep.
And of course, in Kiambu there was an impeachment. The deputy governor takes over and you reconstitute the county executive committee and functions continues. So in Nairobi, I think it's a division of it's a problem of indecision by the current governor. Because if he nominates a deputy governor is approved, then functions will continue. There'll be no crisis really. The other option is where if there's a crisis and everybody believes it's a crisis and things really can't function very well, that option entails then, of course, the suspension of the county government and the formation of an interim management board, which will then manage the county affairs pending the election of a new county assembly and a new governor and the deputy governor. Of course, that is one of for some of us who are in the devolution sector, we have been hearing rumors that national government, of course, wanted to stop money from the county as a way of laying basis. All these are political
moves that are taking place.
Yes, stop money from coming into the county, saying the county is dysfunctional, and then now you set basis for its suspension, and then you do a fresh election.
What's likely to happen now, Peter? Now, okay, we've talked about Nairobi. You're saying, and many people are saying, that this is a decision that can be questioned. What's likely to happen? Are we still going to have, limbo, and then this matter goes to court and takes another 6 months in court? In the meantime, the people of Nairobi are expecting service, and they haven't been receiving service for the last 12 months.
Yeah, I think we are, of course, first of all, we are anticipating a court action. Someone will definitely go to court to challenge the decision, and then we will see how the court will make a decision on that. But in terms of getting a fully functioning county government, what shall happen really is for national government and the county governors through the summit to sit and make decisions for recommendations. If you look at the functions of the summit, if a county government is not performing well, there are problems with that county government. The summit can make recommendations, remedial recommendations on how to get things back on track. So one of the things which has not been done, which will be done, is for the national government and the county governors to sit under the summit and consider everything about Nairobi County and make appropriate recommendations. If one of the recommendations will entail suspending the county government, then I think that process will be commenced, so that we have a fresh election. If that recommendation will entail ratifying the taking over of certain functions by the national government, then we will definitely see that then happen. So I think to me decisions must be made. The president is responsible. All the governors are actually responsible for it as well. So they have to put things put the house in order and make decisions for Nairobi, because they can't leave it to Sonko alone to make the decision. Because they also other functions. Remember, they've only taken 5 critical functions. There are 9 other functions which must be undertaken by the county government.
From a point of view of public participation, they've signed a deed or agreement, and then they're talking about 14 days in which it comes to effect, during which the deed then goes to the National Assembly, it goes to the County Assembly, it goes to the public. From a public participation point of view, Advocate Wanyama, what's your take?
The courts have interpreted the meaning of public participation, and the public participation is supposed to be meaningful and qualitative. So forget about the public participation which is in the Intergovernmental Relations Act. There ought to be a public participation done before this decision is approved by the cabinet of Governor Sonko. There ought to be a public participation by the county assembly itself, because they must go back and consult the people. Remember that these persons are exercising sovereign power from the people. Yes. So before they make such a critical decision, or they line up in making that decision, there must be some kind of an approval mechanism, which in my interpretation might even require a referendum. So so that when now you go to the other procedural public participation and notification of to the county assembly and the Senate, the people will have already approved it in a meaningful and qualitative public participation process, which in my view has been sidestepped, and that's a very, very heavy ground to challenge this agreement, which has been signed into law.
Peter Wanyama, we want to thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for shedding light on this and unpacking this for us. Of course, we know that you understand matters of devolution. You've worked in the devolution sector from the very beginning in 2010 as an advocate. But also, thank you for all your input. Have a good day, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Good day.
Thank you very much.
Goes back to the people. I'm glad that the lawyer agrees. Sort of feeling I could walk around with patting myself. It must go to the people. The people of Nairobi must make this decision to transfer any of their government functions
about public participation and representation. What are these activities that would underpin or qualify a certain process
as qualitative
as public participation?
Yes. You know, there are these stock phrases that we keep using. So what must you see in order to say, aha,
right? Because
we now have public participation.
Yeah, because this is the question. Because if we want to get to, we can shroud this in a lot of legalese and say, but the truth of asking the question, if people are seen to have participated in all of this, what has then happened? Was there a congregation of people at Nyayo Stadium? Did people sit and sign a particular piece of paper? Did people then come before their chief and say, this is what I wanted to happen? Because we can talk about it for yonks, but really,
and how often
is
must
it
this
that
conversation
happens for somebody to say, yes, I participated and my neighbor participated?
Is 2 hours sufficient?
Or is it 2 weeks, 2 months?
And then there's the content of that conversation. There's what sort of forum, who must be included in that forum for it to be considered a wholesome
representation of the
people of this public participation.
If you look at Parliament,
that is intent on capturing key processes so that it can forward its own agenda, and it needs therefore to capture key state processes, and devolution is one of the means of undoing state capture, because when you devolve, you're actually moving power, decision-making power and resources to the ground. It is a key aspect of removing state capture. So the opposite of devolution is centrism. And this government is very centrist. They really want to have control. And like Wanyama said, their intention to re-centralize Nairobi has been an ongoing project. There is Namata. Namata is a roads and infrastructure mechanism that's rooted in a circular issued by the president as far back as 2015. So what they're doing here yesterday, Sonko doesn't know. He's played right into the hands of national government. And there's a court case challenging Namata. When you come back again to roads, Kukera, there's also questions around the role of the Kenya Urban's Board, Kenya Urban's Roads Authority, because of its relationship with the county and usurping aspects of the counties. So what happened yesterday actually is an attempt by national government to play off the disaffection of citizens, Nairobi citizens, and tell them things are so bad, we are here to help. But in actual fact, they had no intention of letting Nairobi function as a county, and it's unfortunate Sonko wound up as governor and played into their hands. But be that as it may, as Wanyama said, this is illegal. It's unconstitutional. It will be challenged in court. And I'm hoping Nairobians will also stand up and challenge it.
So what you're saying is that this is a case of the pot calling the kettle black.
I think I'd like to get
conspiracy theory. Ndiohi. This is what it looks like in reality.
This is reality.
Yes, this is re-centralization.
I think getting back to democratic processes, I think another thing that we overlook or a mistake that we make is to think that public participation will happen at one time, a prescribed date, time, and then it's locked in that box. And I think if we're going to look at the tenets of democracy, it's very important for us to understand that public participation is something that is continuous. and as a process that continues. And I think that's the thing that needs to be out there. It wouldn't then have to be asked, then when did the people participate? Because it's something that people then understand that it's a process that I need to be involved in on a regular basis, that I need to continue giving my opinion. I need to continue agitating for change. It needs to be continuous. So it's not something you can put in a box and say, on the 17th of July at 10 a.m., the public participated in something. No, it's something that needs to go on over and over and
how do you
over
capture
again.
that, though? I mean, if it comes to a specific issue like now this one, if you say that there was public participation from 2017, December 2017, when a new government was sworn in, up to today, how would you have captured it?
Well, how do they capture it normally? How do they capture it now? And that's what I'm saying. These things need to be open on a regular basis. It needs to be open. It shouldn't be that there is...
a suggestion box. like constantly. So
okay, maybe taking something like that.
If we have feedback.
If I may give an example from a research setting, public participation is actually at the heart of any research project. I'm talking about medical research, okay? There's what you call community engagement. And there is a way in which you engage the community. One, if you're talking about meeting and talking to people, you first of all look at the availability or the plethora of leaders who the community have, whether they're civic, whether they're political, whether they're religious, whether they're youth, whether they're women, whether they're opinion leaders. All this is taken into consideration. And these are people you talk to at one level. The issues of barazas where the chiefs are involved is a different level. Meeting before you begin the project is a different level. Having an advisory board from the community whom they choose, not you, to represent them so that you discuss matters of this.
Yet another level.
Yes. And when you start their meetings, when it's going on, their meetings at every stage.
Exactly.
When you finish and you disseminate the information, there are meetings before you disseminate. Meaning, the
Death
information, as you correctly put it, Eric,
it's continuous. It's continuous.
But this one of ours, where it's a one-off.
It's a one-off thing. And the truth is, as Wanjiru said, if the interests of the people were at the heart of the matter, then it wouldn't then be difficult to define this thing that we're calling public participation. It wouldn't be so hard, because at the end of the day that it is them that we are targeting, and we want to know what it is that they really do feel and how they do think and operate. So as you're having all of these meetings or whatever it is that you're going to call them, when you're actually taking the work down to the ground, you know what people feel, because it is then something that it is prescribed as part of the process from the very beginning.
But they also feel they're participating, you see. So there's what we call buy-in. But remember, we're talking about a group of people who solve problems with words, okay? There are these activities that they've decided.
Right now, our analysis shows us that the poor are inordinately picking up the burden, because instead of looking for capital gains tax, corporate tax, there had been proposals to increase those measures. But of course, business lobbied. And business is very well organized. They're able to lobby. And the burden is then transferred to taxes that will hit the common mwananchi. So if you declare it a crisis, and if you then are very transparent, you then say, well, these are our options. What do we do? So that we bear the burden equitably, but also fairly. Because households should not be forced to choose between one meal or 1.5 meals. Or debt. Oh, yeah. Though there are some, we are saying it has to take a human rights-based approach.
Right.
And that's language which government has to put. We were talking to the Treasury, we made submissions. And of course, human rights is, for them, they're looking at us like, as we only understand macroeconomic indicators. We're like, human right, the budget is a human rights instrument. It has to be recognized as such. So we want the disclosure, we want the transparency, we want the decisions put on the table so that there's robust engagement.
I agree with you completely, Wanjiru. However, you're talking about the same government you've been talking about for the last 2 hours, right?
Now that needs to go home.
The reality is that the government that's borrowing, the government that has, had this opaque relationship with us and our debt, is not going to wake up tomorrow and say, all right, you guys, we have decided, because it's Lent, we are going to come clean. No way. There has to be something else that makes the government become more transparent. What is this that we need to do? I'm just not seeing what
we can do. So you've agreed with these provisions.
I completely agree.
I actually don't think that the debt is the problem.
It's a crisis.
No. It's our contracting. You've heard me say this before. It's the contracting that is secretive. Go back to the Kibaki era and talk about our power production. And you will find that we may not use some of those power production sources, but we still pay for them. Contracting. Mm-hmm. If you look at the problem that Kenya Airways has, whether it's with the agreement signed for the leasing or for fuel, contracting. Now you have a situation where we're talking about this railway is called what again? What is it?
SGR.
Yes, okay, this one. Do you know what the collateral is? Our port. If you look at the what you call the debt service to revenue ratio in this country, it's supposed to be at 30%. In 2017, it was 35.8, above. In 2018, it was 30.5, above. In 2019, it was 33.4%. Now, our foreign debt which is owed to China, stands at 72% of what we owe. Now, if you look at all these, you will find that the underlying problem we have, and this is what we're not told, is what we signed. Mm-hmm. If you look at this debt that accrues from the issue of the two dams, the dams
almost dams.
No. This isn't almost. This is an exercise in faith. This is something you need to believe
that will come true.
Not will come true. Actually exists.
It exists.
Yes, and every picture you see, that particular landscape
is Photoshop.
Is as God
There's
created.
A dam.
Okay, now contracting. You were told, yes, this is what you owe. This was what we paid. There's nothing that we can see that was paid for, and yet you realize that if we don't continue paying, then we stand a chance to lose more money. Now you ask, who on earth gets into these contracting processes? I mean, you're talking about being sold. In my opinion, that's the point at which we're sold. We stand to lose the port if we renege on the loan, for instance, that we got for building this railway.
But don't you also agree? That's the same thing that Wajiro is saying. Yes, we have a problem. We have borrowed. But also because we did not disclose how we borrowed or the conditions in which we entered this borrowing, the contracting, we have an issue. If we start saying, let's open up the books,
there's a reason
let's show you the contract.
There's a reason why I'm going at this. You see, let's not talk about the government. Let's be specific. The reason why the two principals in Treasury went home was, as Mutula Kilonzo Jr. told us, they are the fourth arm of government. Willy-nilly, they just do what they like.
Government,
they make
the
decisions.
Treasury.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Wait.
Decisions that affect the rest of the country without taking into consideration that the rest of the country is what you need to keep running.
That's what he said. But those people take instructions.
From the executive.
Yes, they do. Oh, yes, they do. If you see any gross mismanagement and the decisions that they make, it can't be the two people sit down and decide for
at the National Treasury and they came back and there were no checks and balances.
No.
In fact,
there was no question asked.
I totally agree with everything Citi is saying. Part of our demands actually is we want an audit of a robust audit of those loans,
agreements.
The agreements, and also how the money was used. Because the debt to GDP ratio per se is not a problem, because Kenya right now, I think we're inching towards 60%. Our ceiling allows us to go to maybe 100. The debt repayment versus the debt versus the GDP can go up to 100, 110. But countries like Japan, that figure is about 300%.
Yes.
But the difference and this is where IMF, they don't look at these indicators. They look at just these statistics.
They look at the numbers and stick there, right? Yeah.
What terms did you borrow on? For instance, SGR, you take short-term expensive loans for a project that is then going to pay off under the best of circumstances. In the long term. Under best of circumstances, SGR is not the best of circumstances. It was overinflated and its viability is in question, right? So that's number one, the terms on which you borrow. And then, of course, how you apply the money. And so when we are talking about the ratios, the governance, it comes back to the governance.
Well, if
it's
we're
those
gonna- yeah.
decisions. But the point, just to pick up on where City was taking us about the powers of the Treasury. The Treasury has too much power. There is a lacuna, actually, a bit of a lacuna in the Constitution, because the controller of budget must approve all expenditures. But the Constitution is quiet on the approval of revenues. So Treasury has been able to borrow with only parliamentary oversight. Actually, the failure on our debt crisis is Parliament. It's those people we elect to represent us because they have to approve everything.
Those guys are not
So tell us where we
aware
go
of-
from here. Where do we go from here?
They have already told us we do not know. So
We
they are
actually
not aware.
didn't know.
Under
what
the
they
law,
were
ignorance
approving.
is not an
watchdog
excuse.
doesn't
They
know.
actually
Yes.
didn't know. This is the thing. If they are telling you blatantly, because they didn't hide this, it was made public. We actually didn't know what we were approving. Of course, then you have
That's a
to.
lie.
Yeah. They go back, begs the question. If you're going to go and believe what it is that they had said at that point, begs the question, then how on earth then is it that you are representing the people at the end of the day? And I want to go back to Japan as the example now that we talked about. How then are they able to be at 300% and still be all right? Because they made decisions thinking at the same time. They didn't make a decision. They're paying debt. They're paying
We
loans.
also think
They're paying
it's how we think.
They're paying loans at a very, very low percentage.
Yes.
They're still able to pay, and they're still able to keep the economy robust because they made loans that were long-term, and the payback was very, very cheap over time.
Very favorable.
So they were still able to make, and secondly, those that they approached for loans, not only did they not say at some point, actually, thank you very much, but we're not going to be able to accept this. They kept it open, and they didn't make the first decision at whoever came along to lend money. So this is another thing that also needs to be taken into consideration. Taking time to actually look and say, what can we do? But because of the fact that corruption is rife and there's so many things that have gone wrong, and we're trying to then cover and sweep things under the carpet, the first option that comes along in terms of borrowing, unfortunately, in cases of Kenya, it's taken immediately without
Unfortunately
thinking
for us
through
as
the
well,
process.
also let's accept some reality. Unfortunately for us as well, 2013, new constitution getting implemented, new government coming in, big shoes to fill of a previous government. These guys had really a lot of things to do, and there was a lot of pressure from the people. So what do? They want to make
It doesn't
people
justify.
feel
It doesn't justify making a bad.
Political
It
decision.
doesn't. It
True.
doesn't justify making a bad decision about something that's going to affect the
But
economy.
politically,
in
they
the
were
manner,
facing
in the
a lot
manner.
of pressure.
No, yes, pressure. But it doesn't mean that under pressure you continuously make bad decisions.
No, but
no.
you should have let
No,
Eric finish what he
it
was
doesn't
saying.
mean that.
Eric didn't quite.
Let me finish when we come back.
Yes.
It could be this one. Or maybe this one. Maybe even this one. More of the timeless and greatest hits you love.
Family is where it all happens. The highs and the lows, the cries and the laughter, the good times and the bad.
Showers expected in Nairobi later on with highs of 26 and lows of 27. Mostly cloudy conditions right now in Nairobi. Taking a look at Nyeri today at 18 degrees. Showers expected later with highs of 23. In Kisumu, it's partly cloudy conditions, mostly cloudy now. Rain already started in some parts of the city. 29 degrees the high. In Malindi at 27 degrees, 32 the high and 27 the low. Mostly cloudy conditions right now. It's 28 degrees in Mombasa and chances of rain expected later with mostly cloudy conditions currently. In Nakuru at 18 degrees, rain expected later with highs of 26 and lows of 16. It's foggy in Eldoret this morning. Rain expected to come down later with highs of 24 and lows of 15. Further afield in Kampala at 21 degrees, rain and thunderstorms expected later with highs of 27 and lows of 21. It's mostly cloudy in Dar es Salaam at 27 degrees, rain expected with highs of 32 and lows of 26. 14 degrees in Johannesburg and mostly sunny today with highs of 27. And finally in Lagos, clear skies with rain expected later on with highs of 35 and lows of 26.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
Expensive constitution to implement. This constitution was going to be implemented from 2013. A new government comes in. It has that implementation of the constitution. It also has the pressure from the public because of the kind of politics that we had played in 2013. You know, politics of development, politics of a government coming to promise that it's going to deliver to its people, meeting your electoral pledges. This government had a lot of pressure at that point. So, of course, they went into a borrowing spree. At that point, up to that point, okay. Then they also went on an unchecked borrowing spree, which is where now our checks and balances systems come into play. Why is it that Parliament was allowing them to continue borrowing this way? Why is it that, we were not thinking of how much are we borrowing and what conditions are we borrowing at? Are we borrowing long term and short term? Are we borrowing domestically a lot? Are we, chasing other borrowers out of the local market? All those things came into play. But politically, from that point, just to be fair, these guys had to borrow.
Well, yes, borrow. But on what terms and for what purpose? I think you've you've said it yourself. The problem we have is, one, not the implementation of the Constitution. There were mechanisms in place. There was a policy around, for instance, implementation of devolution with regard to how to streamline the costs of this. So there was supposed to be a contraction of national government and an expansion of county governments, so that we avoid the duplication. But this didn't happen. So you've actually hit the nail on the head. The problem is political. The administration came in with a lot of electoral processes. Those were their own processes, their own promises. And they then proceeded to try and implement them, the laptop project. They then went and procured health, these kind of things. They then did the SGR, which had been procured by the Kibaki administration. But under this administration, the cost went up over 100%. So corruption was a choice. And corruption, actually, our debt crisis in Kenya is equivalent. It's directly related to corruption crisis. To our corruption crisis, which is also linked to this aspect that's being called state capture. And the state capture is about an administration that's able to maneuver laid down legal processes and maneuver them to the benefit of a few private individuals, while you have a parliament that is so well remunerated, sitting there, twiddling their thumbs, saying, we didn't know. So this is why we are saying, let's call this a crisis. There's technical details, the amount of borrowing, where did you borrow, the cost of borrowing, all of that. But our big elephant in the room is this political question. So first, it's a crisis. Disclose, then let us have the issues on the table. And once we lay those issues on the table,
then
we then have to have a framework to discuss it. Because right now, actually, we can't resolve, you said it, we can't resolve the debt with this government. Because this government is the cause of the problem. So we need a mechanism that insulates us.
But we are sure that we're not going to have this government in 2 years' time. So don't worry.
No, we have to worry.
No.
Because in 2 years' time, we will not even exist.
It's only 2 years. By the time we're having, we've declared a crisis, and then we set up a framework for us to have this conversation. The 2 years will have lapsed. We'll have a new government. The conversation we'll have is so who is it that's going to get us out of this rut?
Our campaign,
and that
therefore,
is a 2022
No.
So we keep passing the blame and then just moving this problem. What you do is that you keep taking this problem as it is and then you move it forward.
But why not have the people who created the problem
deal with it now?
Yes.
Now. Why are we saying, be held accountable now? And this actually is the problem
by
that
the next government.
This is the problem that we keep dealing with. We keep moving problems forward, moving them forward. And the person in this particular position is then going to say, actually, it's really not my problem because I inherited it from somebody else. So since we're at the point in time where, this administration is soon coming to a close, let's mop up all the other things that we have to do and we'll deal with that problem in the future. That's why we're going to continue going in a circular motion of trouble.
You got me wrong.
Over and over and over
That's
again.
not what I'm saying. I'm agreeing with Wanjiru 100%. Let's call this a crisis. I'm also agreeing with Wanjiru 100% when she says, let's set up a framework for addressing this crisis and for moving forward. right? And I'm also agreeing with Onjiru when she says the person responsible is the current government. Now, what I said is, yes, the current government is responsible. The current government will not solve this problem. And we cannot say, let's first of all remove the government and then start dealing.
Why
let's
not?
do the same, those two things
Why
at
not?
the same time.
Why not?
Let's do the same,
Why
the two
can't
things
we-
at the same time.
why can't-
the pragmatism? We are not going to.
Why can't the
we are
government
not
step
going
aside?
can't we?
Why can't they
in
deal with the problem that they have right
2020,
now?
We are not going to change government
Why
in
can't they
2020.
step aside?
We need a mechanism. And
To
you
get-
know, we've missed a number of opportunities. When we implemented actually drafted the constitution, this constitution, as happened in South Africa, should have had a caretaker period where you have a government as a caretaker whose role it is to operationalize the constitution. Maybe 2 years. I think South Africa did 2 or 3 years to operationalize the constitution. And once they are done, they have to exit
get out.
and allow now the full election under the full constitution because of interests. The way we drafted the constitution, we drafted an excellent constitution, fantastic provisions,
October
and
2010
then
we should have had
gave it to the political leaders who are going to be undermined, whose interests were being undermined by the constitution. It doesn't work. Similarly to debt, we tell the government, you are the ones in power. You are the ones who have a vested interest in this issue. You're the beneficiaries at our expense. Therefore, we need a mechanism that you remove yourself, not necessarily move out of power, but we need a process that is insulated from their role. The other opportunity we missed was after 2017. When we had this standoff between Raila and Jubilee and NASA, there was call for a caretaker government. And the reason we would have needed a caretaker government is because the electoral process had been fundamentally undermined to such an extent that we cannot, vouch for the veracity of any of the electoral results. We cannot vouch for the veracity of the impending
It wasn't as bad as
review of borders. The point is this.
It wasn't as bad as 2007.
We are in a crisis. You don't say we're in a crisis, therefore let's continue business as usual. So our aim is, 1, to declare the crisis, 2, go to the people, ask citizens, make citizens aware, so that citizens can then really lend voice to this issue.
So what is this mechanism and framework that you're suggesting? Are you suggesting
No, I'm
that
not
we
suggesting
create?
yet, but...
Not yet?
Not yet.
Okay, so
we haven't yet. We have.
She hasn't prescribed yet.
I haven't prescribed. I'm not the one to prescribe.
Because
you're the stakeholders. In fact, here we are having a conversation.
Because when I was saying,
you agree there's a debt problem.
Yes.
What is your proposal?
This is my
because
proposal.
what about yes, City.
You see, one of the hallmarks of a stable government is not the debt they have, because if you're talking about ratios, China's GDP to the debt public is 47%. America's is at 104%. So it's not that. It's one's ability to repay without refinancing.
Right, and also when it then affects the standards of living of the country, that's when you have the problem.
You see, the refinancing has this problem. Huh? If it hampers economic growth and ours doesn't hamper it, it's actually decimating it, then we are actually unstable. We may think we are not, but we actually are. Now, that's when the alarm bells begin to ring. Every other day, the taxman comes with a new way of taxing. Eating mangoes in public, tax. Okay? Breathing heavy, tax. Okay? Walking sideways, tax. Suddenly, what they're doing is they are pulling in whatever financial resources we have. Now, an economy thrives on what you call the vortex of this. Money has to be available for it to move around. They have proceeded to issue these bonds locally, and by so doing, they actually absorb our liquidity. So what do you have? You have a situation when people don't have money to do things. They are hampering the growth of the economy. That's what is dangerous.
Okay.
Now
you
my prescription.
Yes.
I always give a psychological background before I actually prescribe. My prescription is not that we boil these leaders in hot oil. That usually doesn't solve the problem. What solves the problem is to look at what our constitution allows us to do in order to get rid of people who are clearly inept. You see, now somebody may argue, it's harsh. It isn't harsh. If every step you take does the complete opposite of what your role as a leader is supposed to do, then you are inept. If there are people who are in government who you have brought into being and their functions are inept, you are inept.
If you have people who continue to suffer as a direct result of 1 or 2 or 10 individuals not doing their job,
who you
brought into power, then the results of removing them from that position are not harsh.
And also, if you have such a large-scale situation where people who are appointed to office seem to be doing the complete opposite of what they wanted, then it means your government has failed.
So, CT, your prescription is impeach the presidency.
Yes.
And then what do we do with the others?
Well, the problem with that, City, because your analysis up to that point is spot on. And in fact, we're dealing with an inept, corrupt government.
Ineffective,
by the way.
Incompetent in
all
everything.
All of those terms apply.
Can you take a look at traffic, and then the conversation continues. This is the Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. Wajiro Gikonyo, our guest host this morning, is saying, first of all of us as a country, starting with our government, must accept that we have a crisis, a national debt crisis. Declare this crisis, tell us exactly what we owe, whom we owe, what is at stake, and then let's deal with the issue from there. It's 8:30.
Heavy traffic on Kiambu Road this morning. Not really sure what's going on there, but we're right now at 8 lanes and some people potentially falling off the road at this point. Hopefully that will be taken care of. But then, of course, this affects traffic that is joining Thika Road. All right, the traffic officers controlling Airport North Road joining Mombasa Road seem to be asleep because there's heavy traffic as far back as the turnoff, and that's still at 9 o'clock. So that's not happening, folks. It's taking a lot longer to get off the main Mombasa Road today. Of course, if you're not yet past, you can use the Eastern Bypass to get where you're going. Juja Road, we have some issues there. Naivasha Road now joining Tungong Road right around Dagoretti Corner. Very, very sticky this morning. We'd have thought traffic hour was coming to an end, but it seems to just be waking up in some parts of the city right now. Getting off Langata Road is not too bad, trying to join Bagathi Way and then get into the city, right around the City Mortuary roundabout, and then down towards Valley Road. So everywhere you look seems to be a bit of a mess. Some places where we can call solace. SpiceFMKE on Twitter, rather. Let us know what you see. Let's see how we can keep some folks who might be stuck moving this morning.
Breathing life into the 80s. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
So we're looking at prescriptions. Prescription number 1, CT Muga.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself.
Wajiro challenged me, and I want to take her back. What was the governor of Kiambu impeached for?
Abuse of
office.
Mm-hmm. When you subvert the constitution, you are supposed to bring about a devolved situation where resources are taken to the counties where they're most needed. And for the better part of your stay in that position as the presidency, what you've done is to subvert that particular aspect of the constitution. How better are they than the county governor of Kiambu? When the decisions you make, the economic policies you have, and you say and you speak of are abrogated at every turn, every promise you made is not fulfilled, projects which you begin are not completed, you've lied, in other words, to the people who elected you and whose president you say you are. You have put their collective lives in danger. it means the responsibility that you say you hold, you have fallen short of.
We have agreed.
Why
on
should
that.
you be in office?
We have agreed on that. The buck stops with the president.
This is not a buck
and
stopping.
This is
This
full
is the same
responsibility.
rules we are using for the county. These are governments, county governments, use it for the
apply.
national government.
The issue, however, though, is we're talking about, so we declare a crisis and then we get rid of the president. If we follow that constitutional route, we are now going to have another election. We'll be dealing with the election instead of dealing with the next crisis.
Don't get to the election. Don't get to the election. Did we give...
So we remove a president and then what?
Are we giving... We go to another election.
There
Bring
you
it
go.
quicker. Bring it sooner.
This confusion, I actually is part of the reason why I think as Kenyans we are paralyzed, because we can see this has gone badly wrong. Like you say, they are corrupt, they are inept, they are ineffectual, all of that. This administration needs to go. And I think across the board, that is evident. Jubilants, the die-hard jubilants, in fact, are the worst hit, because they tend to be the small businesses.
The Durakus.
Well, yes, you can.
They've suffered.
They have suffered,
Hey,
and they are the
man,
first
they've
to
suffered.
say that this is not what we signed up for. Not in the dairy industry. I can't believe an administration that has its power base in central Kenya would go for the dairy industry. Really, not.
Not a smart move.
So we are agreed that they need to go. But our problem is this. As we are having this conversation, which is a very sensible, rational conversation about our interests, there is infighting around who is... This administration is not only disregarding our pain, they are already thinking about 2022.
And how they're going to continue with what it is that they have been doing.
So
they should, with their proper politicians.
BBI is a strategy of ensuring that the first family's interests will remain taken care of, and that the DP will be removed from the equation, because that was the political
speculation.
Is that speculation or is that a reality?
I'm
Is there not?
I'm thinking,
That's
yeah.
speculation.
You know a lot more about this BBI.
This BBI then.
No,
No,
if
this
you
is-
look at Tanga Kieleweke, what is it about other than 2022?
It is.
And isn't it about, in 2017, wasn't Uhuru and Ruto together?
They were.
Yes, for political expediency. So once Uhuru got into the seat, it's then time now to clean up and make sure 2022
Is secured.
the DP doesn't get to the seat.
Speculation.
Let's speculate that way.
Right.
Based on the evidence before us, we are speculating accordingly. And so we have an economic crisis. We have a political crisis, actually a failure of political leadership. But our political leadership is busy thinking about 2022 and their own succession. That is where we need to figure out as citizens, what do we do?
What do you think of CT's prescription
I'm saying
then?
grind it to a halt.
Grind it to a halt.
He's saying
we can refuse to pay tax.
Get rid of this government tomorrow. Like impeach the
Start the process.
Start the process.
Impeach
Look,
the president.
Impeachment
and the-
process.
and
How
the
do you
deputy.
think
Refuse to pay tax.
How do you think such people
You're
actually
telling this
understand
parliament.
things?
You're telling the same parliament to impeach the same. Come on,
Actually-
reality.
No, it's not.
Pragmatism.
It's not us four seated around the table that are going to go and say, parliamentarians,
Yeah, no,
please,
no,
we
no.
urge you. We get to the citizens and we tell them, guys, it's now or never.
You know,
What if citizens came up in numbers and
Yes.
insist?
That this needs
Eric,
to happen.
Tell your
That-
MP,
that-
ukipiga kura
that the
hapo,
MP must
impeach.
vote.
Yes.
That
You
the
know-
MP
you know,
must
Eric-
vote.
Yes.
Now,
Eric, you have a
Sovereignty.
valid point.
we are in March 2020. By the time you're gathering those numbers, so that those numbers can put pressure on all members of parliament, so we can get 2/3 of members of parliament impeaching a president, and the president goes home, and then you start dealing with those same parliamentarians again, we'll be in 2022.
Actually,
CT, your prescription is what I'm looking at.
No. I had
Specifically,
actually-
you're saying,
I'd actually
well, even if we
started-
declare
Impeach
this,
is one option.
can I give you details of what I am saying? I said impeach, but my statement was follow what is laid down. There is no MP that is thinking of retiring in 2022.
No, of course not.
They're
Everybody's
either
looking
going to aspire for a
their
higher
positions,
seat,
right?
or they want to continue the same. All right, now, what is it that they would fear the most? Not being elected.
And who elects them? There you go.
You see,
This
so
is the thing.
long
so
as-
therefore,
That is an excellent question. And Eric, my response to that very appropriate question is this. Pressure that is brought to bear begins with conversations like the ones we are having here. This is really what I'm trying to tell you. In this very same show, you heard me say once, I said, if my taxes are not being used properly, I really have no obligation to pay them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now,
It's
I was told
constitutional.
I am fomenting revolt, and I said, no, I am speaking the truth.
You know why
Because
it seems like such a far off thing because it has never been tried. Let's just be honest and look at it now.
I wish that was your prescription,
in terms of citizen agitation, if we look at how it has happened in other countries in the world, it seemed like a pipe dream until people were actually having the conversation.
What is your prescription?
I do agree that it needs to go to the people. I say that the agitation needs to happen in the minds of people because we have not come to grasps. We've not come to grasps as to what really are the effects of corruption, or to look at just as an example, or mismanagement of office, or abuse of office. Because of abuse of office, because of corruption, these are the things that actually happen. When you make the connection for people to say that the things that you are going through now, these injustices that you are suffering, this is the reason why. When people are able to resonate with that, that is why you see the mental revolt that takes place until you see the physical protests that actually happen.
Remember,
and when people now are able to have an appreciation for these things, that is when you have people talking. That is when it becomes easier to make the connection between, you know what, you can sit here and accept it, or you can actually do something about it.
This is theory. Now, practical.
No, I'm being very practical. I'm being very practical.
Most
And we
Kenyans
have
do not
the
really
conversation.
The country. I mean, we may look at it politically, but in actual terms, it's Kenyans saying, even if I don't like a leader, I may vote, but my vote doesn't necessarily count. So that actually is very disempowering. Then in terms of the war against corruption, you have more of the same. You've got investigations that are started that never end. That, investigations that only seem to net the lowest level officers. And, very few of the political bigwigs are falling, to that. So the problem I put to you, because we've diagnosed the problem and we've agreed with this problem, we've even agreed where the responsibility lies. The what to do is actually being disabled because Kenyans don't know which levers to pull. And I think the conversation we started was the correct one, that we need to get outside the box and actually say, well, we have a constitution that empowers us, but possibly the legal processes prescribed in the constitution might not work with an administration that is violating the constitution.
We are talking about the mindset of Kenyans and the condition state that it's in and how difficult it is to change. In a sense, there's something that is referred to again in my field of endeavor. It's called behavior change intervention. Now, in a political setting, a little shock goes a long way in assisting. The impeachment of the county government of Kiambu was one such shock. What is happening to Governor Sonko right now is yet another shock. Now, when it happened to the two gentlemen in Treasury, it was a shock, but not as big as what you see when it happens to somebody in the county, because these are people who have been elected.
Yep.
Now, remember, when I say we support corruption, I'm not saying it lightly. Corruption doesn't always present itself as corruption. It presents itself as assistance. It presents itself as thank you. It presents itself as taking care of your... It presents itself in many ways other than what it actually is. It has an entire wardrobe of clothing that it puts on when it presents itself to you. Now, you say we are afraid. I would say that the Kenyan psyche is...
Or disempowered. Afraid and disempowered.
They actually are. But what I would say, the Kenyan psyche is represented by our ability and our enormous capacity for self-preservation. Mm-hmm. So we will immediately tune in and fit in when we understand that this is where our interests will be taken care of. The morality and anything else takes second and third place. Self-preservation. When you see the inactivity, that is a Kenyan preserving himself. Wanting to make sure that... The example I've given Eric is the Kasarani conference for KANU, where we're discussing Section 2A. And all the speakers prior to President Moi had said, this Baba na Mama, this constitution, we can only survive with one party.
It's
it's
opposition
everybody is also opposition. They are reptiles, they are amphibians. They said everything. President Moi stands up and says, actually, you know something? We're introducing multi-party. There was a 1 second hiatus, and then, yes, indeed, multi-party.
Same people.
Aye.
City, I'm afraid you might be right about that diagnosis. So what?
Have you seen
what
that
then
reluctant
do we do?
acceptance?
Yeah. You may
Bend this thing a
somehow
little
be
bit.
slightly right that
I'm just
we
saying.
have an innate, inherent self-preservation culture that predisposes us to lethargy and apathy as opposed to action. So we are very unhappy.
Now here is
What
Wajiro
do
telling
we
us
do?
it's the system that has failed us.
Wajiro.
No, the system has conditioned us, no
There you
doubt.
go.
The system, no.
We have allowed the condition, the system. No, we
the
have.
system has conditioned us.
Believe
This
me,
system thing, how big is it, Wajiro?
System is big because system is the power.
we have
All right.
allowed.
Read the state capture report.
Right. Now this system
Maina Washira,
thing.
it's where the real power lies.
Let me ask you.
Human beings are rational, and if you perceive that your efforts will not bear fruit, you may try once, 2 times, 3 times. After that, you will acquiesce or exit.
Let me
right?
ask you.
So our system, our colonial system, our neo-colonial system now, actually is very entrenched and is very strong and has really is the one, in my view, that has conditioned us into the state of acquiescence. This self-preservation.
So
the question is,
Maina
what
Washira should be given a job.
What
Because Maina
behavior
Washira
change
did
interventions?
something, and he came up with this whole thing and the concept of state capture, and he sold it. And the civil society in Kenya, everybody. When our friend Patrick Adara calls here, he talks about the same
State
thing. State capture,
This animal.
colonial system.
State capture.
Same. Now, Maina Washira, if we actually told Maina Washira, you know what, Maina? Now, call this corruption crisis, debt crisis. Give it something.
It's state capture.
Right? It's going to get legs. Here is the thing. What is it that we can do practically? And we're getting into the practical issues. If we said today that we'd like the government to declare this a crisis, first of all, expecting this government to declare what it has done a crisis, it'll take time. So how do we?
No, I don't agree. Can I first just stop you there? You keep
Latif,
Eric, you keep saying it will take time. You don't know that. We could be at the tipping point. The one thing we can control as civil society and as Kenyans is education. People need to understand.
And then our education.
We can education around this issue.
About this matter.
Yes. So the political education that we can control.
How
because
long?
it's telling no. It's not about how long. It's let's reach people. You do not know what people will do once they know. That one you can't control.
How long
Kenyans
would it
could be
practically
sitting.
take us to
Maybe if we
actually
had
get
this
that
conversation,
critical mass of people to understand and to be aware and to buy into
when you're
what
at
we're
a tipping point, your question is actually very redundant
And
because
you know why we are
Kenyans
starting?
organize. I'll tell you something.
But we are starting from the point of trying to show the people that we are at a tipping point.
I'll tell
and
you
for them
my
to accept.
experience as we've worked with communities in public participation at the local level. Do not underestimate human endeavor
Ingenuity.
and ingenuity. Much as we may be in a self-preservation state, a state of apathy, once enlightened, you do not know what actions a community will
It
take.
isn't apathy.
That I agree.
It is self-preservation. There's a gentleman called John Githongo. John Githongo had a very interesting ministry, and he was PS. I didn't hear very many voices coming to his support when he took that very unpopular position of actually saying, folks, we have a problem here, and it's here, and it's these people here. Even people who ordinarily would talk against corruption and right, I didn't see those people coming. If anything, they vilified him. What does that tell you about how we understand corruption? It's always somebody else who's corrupt, never our own. It is always these other people. And when we really run out of options, it is the state. No.
Which is why I'm agreeing with what Wajiro is saying, that once we get a critical mass, we will have movement. The point I'm raising is it'll take us some time to get that critical mass. This government is not going to wake up tomorrow and say, oh yeah, you know what, guys, things are thick. No. We have to get critical mass to push the government to accept that this is where we are and then declare this crisis and then from that point on come up with this framework. Now, this is what I'm saying.
Civil society can help in this.
And I don't think
our
time,
government
25
will,
months.
the government will declare a crisis if they can understand that there's money they can get for this crisis.
I don't think time needs to be looked at as an impediment to this process, because again, you find that some
not impediment. I'm just being realistic. I'm just saying, yes, it'll take us some time. Let's first of all accept that. Just like you want us to accept it's a crisis, let's also accept it's going to take us X.
At the same time, let's also accept the possibility that when people are then faced with another option, that they could actually roll with it very quickly. If we're going to accept that, let's accept this also. That the possibility is there.
We have accepted.
Yes, so
how
this is
long
something
before
that can,
the people get
but
to
you're
that
still
tipping
going
point?
back
You
to that
don't
point
know.
that you don't know. It could be today.
None of us know.
It could be tomorrow.
It cannot be a week.
Your problem is that you want to see that it happen. If it doesn't happen now, it's going to take the next 25 months.
You know, Eric, your behavior
Sunday.
actually is really supporting
You've
what
got it.
what City says.
Thank
You
you.
want this tidy framework where we do political education,
And then to the next,
either
and then
it
to the
takes
next.
root now or after 2022.
If you don't-
never.
It is not tidy,
If you
and
don't
we
have-
do not know, but
if
we
you
must
don't
do the
have a-
political
if you
education.
don't
You
have a-
must
there
try.
go. Political education is a framework.
What framework?
no,
It's a political conversation.
Exactly, but it
State
has to be
capture.
structured.
Who said it has to be
It
structured?
doesn't have to be structured.
By
The
the
way
way,
you guys have written a letter, the way you're coming here, this is structure. You know,
Reform
this is
can be
structure.
structured or unstructured. It depends on the state. If the state does not give space for the ventilation of issues, it will be unstructured. So we do not know, but I
it's
think
taking place anyway.
the
and
one
that
thing
is
we
what
can
is
say
important.
is we must have the conversation. We must get it out to as many as possible,
Yes.
as clearly as possible,
Yes.
and we must think about options. Impeachment, some scenarios
One.
around that. Resignation,
Another one.
don't pay tax. Give
All
those
those.
options, and then see what Kenyans say.
Yes.
Kenyans may disappoint us and say, well, we feel the pain, but
We're okay with it.
We're okay. Let the future generations deal with the consequences. Or people may rise
And
up,
once
especially
again, I'm
young
agreeing
people.
with everything you guys are saying, but you guys are not seeing the point I'm making. So I'm going to come back to that point.
He's saying
7
it's taking
minutes to
too
9.
long.
It's taking too long.
Spice FM. Nyeri. Classic soul, R&B, smooth jazz, neo soul, and nostalgic ballads.
Make some noise.
You're listening to Spice FM. Breathing life into the 90s.
Everybody, what's up?
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
This is the Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation. My name is Eric Latif. We have Nduoko, CT Muga, our guest host.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning. Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
We'd like the government to look at our national debt, our public debt, and call this a crisis. Call it for what it is. It's a crisis. And for all of us as Kenyan citizens to also call it a crisis. And then from that point on, start dealing with how do we address this crisis?
The national debt, actually, if you look at it, isn't the crisis. It's our managers who have presented the crisis. We have a debt that isn't...
Are the managers the crisis?
Yes, they are, because of the way they go about the business of actually managing it. You see, countries have debts. That's why I talked about the GDP to debt ratio that other countries have. And some of it is high. But the reason why it's a non-issue is because they don't have a problem with repaying it. They don't destabilize the economy. The growth of the economy isn't hampered or hindered in any way. Ours is. When you have a tax system that is intended to bolster the government reserves so that we can actually meet the needs that we have in terms of debt repayment, in terms of just running our economy, then it is the people who are charged with this duty of managing it who are doing something wrong. Not at mismanaging it. They're actually doing something wrong because these are people who are trained. It's not that they don't know what to do. They do. But if you look at the scandals that follow, it means that this self-preservation I was talking about, here's the twist in it. It's now not self-preservation. It is actually a situation where you want to look after your interests at the cost of everyone's life. Everyone in the country be damned, but you will want to do this so that you can better yourself. Now, it's the individuals. The decisions are made by... When Parliament tells you they didn't know, man, they didn't know.
Of course they did. Or if they didn't, then they are admitting that
well,
they're
if
totally
they didn't,
incompetent.
then they should all resign en masse, because if you didn't know and that is your job, then what do you know?
You're incompetent.
Yes.
What
do you know?
Plain and simple. Now, the argument I was making prior to this is, yes, we need to take action and we need to look at what action to take. The point, first of all, the first point of the win is the national government declaring this a crisis. For us to get to that national government declaring this a crisis, will not take just a letter written by the civil society taken to the National Treasury or a petition sent to the current parliament as it's constituted. This will not move us. It has to be critical mass of people making a lot of noise, and that noise then forces the government to sit back and take action. Now, that's what I was saying. This, if I'm looking at it from, we are in February 2020, by December 2020, what are we likely to be having? By December 2020, I'm seeing us getting to that point where we have critical mass of loud mouths across the country saying we have a national crisis called national debt for us as a people. So it takes us like the next 10 months of all these.
You
public education, awareness, agitation, civil society, having conversations, being dismissed initially, and then, catching on this fire. This is a year.
The waiting or unwaiting ally in this conversation can be these very same members of parliament. Because there are members of parliament who actually see and understand and say, no, this is a problem. Now, they have a platform from which they can make that what we're calling noise in a different in a different setting, but they can. That conversation can begin in the Senate. There are people who can make those statements within Parliament. They can.
There are platforms upon which this agitation actually can be carried out right now.
Believe me, it's not something that is difficult to see or understand. You only need to look at, if you follow Mbagathi, or you follow any of these pathways that that border settlements where large populations stay, the number of people you see walking on the road early in the morning has increased. Starting point. Food prices have also increased. Number of people who visit our hospitals have increased. The ability or the inability of our hospitals to meet these needs have increased. Actually, all the wrong things have increased. It tells you
stars are aligning.
Yes. The crisis is not coming to us. It's with us.
It's already here.
Now, it's a question of just stating this thing that you see is exactly what a crisis is, and we have it.
And something needs to be done about it now.
In the next hour, we'll be joined by an economist, Wagari Moikia. She will be here. She's an expert in public finance management. To continue this conversation, debt, national crisis, and all. Good morning. This is The Situation Room. It's Kenya's biggest conversation. It's 9 o'clock.
May have changed. Still have a situation on Mombasa Road as well as Kiambu Road, of course, then affecting what happens on Thika Road. Langata, opposite Dam Estate, an accident happened earlier this morning. That means that there is quite the mess on Langata Road this morning. Actually, right now as we speak, Thika Road, of course, a little bit still snaking towards the city centre, moving a little bit slower than we expected, but officially out of traffic hour, so things should move a little smoother as we go along. Of course, if there's anything that you see that we ought to know about, don't hesitate to give us a call, 0719-012-600. Reach us on Twitter, SpiceFMKE. Let's know what you see. It shouldn't be so bad now from here on out. But of course, we'll get that information from you and pass it on as much as we can.
This is The Situation Room, the home of hard-hitting political commentary and penetrating insights about the state of the nation. This is a talk radio experience like no other. The Situation Room, a place for hard truths, debates, and conversations. The Situation Room, witty, political, engaging, deep, controversial. In the room, we have C.T. Muga, researcher, academic, seasoned political observer, a fountain of wisdom in these politically uncertain times. Ndu Oko, Nigerian by birth, Kenyan by choice, communications expert, Pan-Africanist, a truth seeker and believer in people power, and Eric Latin,
and today
agent
we also
provocateur,
have a guest host,
the man in the chair,
Konya,
seasoned journalist, news hound, a man who
for
believes
social
in punching up, not
and
down.
she brought up the topic that we
This
discussed
is
in
the
last,
Situation
60
Room,
minutes,
the
which
only
is
way
on
to start
national
your
debt,
day.
a ballooning national debt. Now we are joined for the next 1 hour by an expert on these matters, a public finance management expert, economist, Wangari Moikia. She is the executive director of Expertise KE, which is a consultation. Starting from there, we should declare our national debt a national crisis.
Well, I have maybe a more tempered view because let's start from the basics, right, Eric? The reason that we are getting into this debt situation is because we've been operating on a deficit for a long time. We create budgets. Our budgets, time and time again, have been unrealistic. We've not been able to meet those budgets. We then have revenue projections, and we're not able to meet those revenue projections. As you know, KRA has not been able to raise the revenues that it has been projecting for the past several years. So we end up with...
Is it that they haven't been able to raise those, or is that they raise them but they don't end up where they're supposed to end up?
Well, okay, that is also a confounding factor. But, structural issues, they're never really simple. Yeah, there's always the fiscal framework, and then there's also the confounding factors when it comes with corruption. But let's get back to the debt issue, right? So we then now have this huge fiscal deficit that we want to plug. And remember, we have Big Four, we have very ambitious goals in terms of trying to achieve this vision that we have for ourselves. And we have county governments, we have a really large wage bill. We have a lot of things that we need to budget for, that we need to raise money for, that we are not able to raise money for. So enter stage left, debt. The challenge now we're having is that Kenya became a middle-income country a few years ago. This had really big, almost catastrophic result on or effect on Kenya, because now we're not able to access concessional loans from the World Bank and IMF and other institutions like that. And now we have to actually go to the markets to borrow. And this is a strange situation for us. We've never been here. So every time when you hear about Eurobond, it's a new thing. Even you open the newspaper, it's like, what is the Eurobond? People are trying to figure out where are we, what are we doing?
What's a middle-income country? What is it? A middle-income economy?
Well, a middle-income economy is an economy that raises a certain level of dollars per capita that, according to international organizations, is more sustainable going forward. And I don't have the exact figure right now, and I'm sure I can get it for you. But there are different levels. There's low-income economy, and there's middle-income economy, and then there's high-income economy.
And what are the indicators? That is the theory behind it. So, as a Kenyan, what do I need to see happening, and what do I need to feel to know that I'm in a middle-income country?
You need to be able to earn a certain level of income per day, per capita. So per capita, you should be able to access a certain amount of income or revenues to be able to run your daily living. But you see,
percentage of the population needs to be in a certain position.
The per capita, the equalizer for the country is to learn a certain level of income. But the challenge is, if I may, CT, is that the inequality in Kenya is so high that you have that when you even out and you average it, yes, it comes to a middle income state, but the reality is that there's a large portion of the population that are very low, and there's a small portion of the population that is very high. So the inequality factor, this is the problem with statistics, international statistics, that they don't capture these type of idiosyncrasies when it comes to...
They're not real to our situation.
Yeah. So when now you layer that on top of and say, okay, Kenya is a middle income country, and to some extent we do feel it. We see like the roads are being, we have the roads are being developed and things like that. We have a railway. We kind of see some things. schooling. We see
we've
healthcare.
International
Yeah,
airports.
but we've never had an SGR, have we?
No, we haven't. And we haven't had such a huge debt accruing.
So structurally, that is not sustainable. You cannot have 20% of the country sustaining the rest of the whole 100% of the country.
But that statement is not really entirely true, because if you are saying that the only measure that seems to lend itself to an equitable contribution to tax payment is pay as you earn, then are we not ignoring the indirect taxes that every Kenyan pays, whether they like it or not, through foodstuffs or costs that are passed down because of fuel levy and things like that? So I would argue that there's no Kenyan who actually escapes from paying taxes.
Yes, but
all.
you see, you as a Kenyan who is paying PAYE, you are paying that consumption tax and also paying the other tax.
Yes, I am.
So that's where the 20% comes in her argument.
Right, but the
that
question...
everybody else is paying tax, yes, but the consumption tax. But then there are people who are paying higher, significantly higher.
And the percentage...
But the question that we were asking is, are we in a debt crisis? Because of these very factors that you're saying, the fact that we have irresponsible borrowing, high inequality, expenditure priorities that are, quite imprudent. So, yes, debt is good. We've procured a large amount of debt. We are borrowing. Right now, we are doing high concessionary and, in fact, even local borrowing at very expensive terms to pay off the interest of the debt. Is that not what a crisis looks like? I believe there are even considerations to rebase the economy once again.
So what's happening is that debt is around, from last I saw, it's about 60% of GDP, which is also another question for another day. I don't know why we measure debt by GDP, but that's some basic things that we also need to discuss, yeah. But it's about 60% of GDP. Our band that we set for ourselves as Kenyans is it shouldn't go higher than 50%, but the absolute maximum it could go, if it does go over 50%, is 70%. Right now we're at 60%. So in and of, if we base that...
And the argument is if that is computed, we'll
surpass it very quickly.
We'll surpass it. And the debt ceiling, I think, took us to about 100, would take us to 100%, or does it take us to 70%?
Well, right now, the debt ceiling would take us to about 100%. So
and their argument that if we computed what government has not factored in to the debt in terms of this rolling debt stock and in terms of the state-owned enterprises debt, if that was factored in, the argument is that it will get up to near 100%. So we are in a crisis. It's just that it doesn't look like a crisis because government has not declared.
So I think we've not... to the extent that the parastatals are also holding debt, there are also parastatals that are also holding a lot of excess cash. The challenge that we have, and we are doing this big project with the National Treasury at the moment, is that we don't have an eye on this debt, and we don't have an eye on these excess reserves that these parastatals have. We are in a case where sometimes the government is going outside of the country and even going into domestic borrowing when the money is actually sitting in some big parastatals and they're not being used. So it's like we are borrowing and then we're going back to the people that we have given money, the parastatals that are holding excess reserves. Those parastatals are then lending to the government because they have excess reserves, right? So it's a really bad situation where, let's say, Ojira, I give you money and then I don't have any money and then I give you a loan. Or I give you a loan and then now you're able to access debt from, you're able to access resources from me with the money that I gave you. So it's a really untenable situation. So I would go back and say the fundamentals are not strong for the economy. We haven't, in the sense that we haven't reached the kind of alarm point of 70% is the confounding factor that says it's not a crisis, but the fact that we are going there quick and we have not really investigated or interrogated the fiscal fundamentals thoroughly and completely, that's where we have the problem going forward.
Are these indicators sufficient? I mean, really? Because according to, like you say, the international, the IMF indicators, we are in a moderate risk, at a moderate risk level. But And for Treasury, that's not a bad statement because they want to be able to borrow more. But as a country and for Parliament, are these indicators really sufficient?
But what are the other indicators you should look at? If you're talking about a country where even as the few who are considered to be extremely wealthy increase, those who are considered to be extremely poor also increase. Now, these are the sort of economic situations that bring about instability. Now, if you have a situation where you have social instability, the economy of necessity will suffer. Now, if once again the debt that we speak of is owed more to people outside entities like foreign governments or foreign banks, and then with ours it's compounded where even the public, a lot of them, the debt is also owed by the public. Now, what you have is, as they've absorbed our liquidity. So what do you have? A situation where the sort of activity that is required to keep an economy moving is actually being hampered by the same government who want to claim by the statements they make that they are working towards growing the economy. And then their actions are stifling the economy. What do you say, my dear?
Well, some of the fundamentals, if you look at how we measure debt, that is also a big, it doesn't really make sense. If you say debt to GDP, GDP in and of itself is a statistical measure that is not complete. We leave a lot out of GDP.
Especially if you look at the Western concept with a situation like Kenyans, there's a lot they don't even consider.
Yeah. So what a better measure I would put forth is we should look at debt to revenue, right? So because that's what we use to finance our debt. So if we look at our debt to revenue ratio, the last I read from a report from the IMF in January, we were at around 40%. Essentially, 40% of our revenues is being used to pay our debt. That leaves only 60% to finance everything that we have in the budget, which means we're looking at, salaries, we're looking at the recurrent budget, we're looking at the big four, we're looking at all these things. And already we don't even have enough revenues in the first place, right? So it really becomes a challenge, I think, when it comes to thinking about this. The exposure to foreign, because we're borrowing internationally, commercial loans are expensive. It's denominated in dollars or euros or whatever it is. And so it leaves us exposed to foreign volatility as opposed to holding it in country.
You can never actually fully pay because the moment there's a fluctuation in the currency, you're actually back where you started.
And you see, this is why Japan is able to manage its debt. I heard a discussion about Japan happen earlier. Japan's debt is denominated in yen mostly.
Yes, it is.
And their debt to revenue ratio is about 5%, which means 95% of their revenues goes back to the country, and they're able to invest
and develop.
Not like
Absolutely.
us. Yeah.
Take a short break. This is a situation about 17 minutes past 9 o'clock. We have in the studio with us an economist, Wangari Moikia. She's the Chief Executive Officer of Expertise Global Consulting. We are talking about a national debt. Remember, this is what our guest host this morning, when Njoroge Konyo had raised and said we should declare national debt a national crisis. Good morning.
Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Showers expected in Nairobi, 25 the high today, currently 20 degrees. In Nyeri this morning at 20 degrees as well, partly cloudy conditions, thunderstorms expected later. Kisumu at 22 degrees, mostly sunny now after a shower, and it will take place again with 29 the high today. Malindi at 28 degrees, highs of 32 and lows of 27. In Mombasa at 30 degrees right now, thunderstorms expected later with highs of 33. 20 degrees in Nakuru, rain expected there later as well with highs of 26 and lows of 16. It's 18 degrees in Eldoret, showers expected later with highs of 24. Quick glance into East Africa at 22 degrees, mostly cloudy conditions, thunderstorms expected in Kampala. And Dar es Salaam at 29 degrees, 31 the high, and showers expected later as well. Rounding things up in Johannesburg at 17 degrees, mostly sunny conditions through the day with highs of 26 and lows of 15.
Pure golden sound and good talk. 94.4 Spice FM. Intelligent humor and nostalgic music.
20 minutes up to 9. Good morning and thank you very much for tuning in to Spice FM. This is The Situation. Kenya's biggest conversation. My name is Eric Larson. We have CP Muga. Nduwoko, our guest
That's part of the show.
and our guest is our
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
The question that you need to answer now directly, yes or no, crisis or not?
Before you answer that question,
Thank you. Because I don't have a straight answer for that one.
Is such a gentleman.
So I got you.
what would you say is the nature of the debt that we have to pay on a yearly basis? How much is it?
Well, currently it stands around 6 trillion. Part of it is commercial loan, part commercially denominated debt. Then we have concessional, which I think the last I saw, the actual figures I saw, I think it was in 2018. It was about half and half. But that has, we've gone through the Eurobond. We're now going again to the market. So that I think has increased. Now, if we have a larger percentage, which we do now, of commercial borrowing, then we are paying a lot of
it's a huge amount
of interest.
Oxfam and the Kenya Institute of Economic Affairs put us third after Angola and Ethiopia. These aren't supposed to be good statistics. Okay? Ethiopia is doing okay. Angola has been heading in the direction of a failed state. Not quite there, but they're also not us. So how do you call us what is it called? Middle income country?
Moderate risk.
Well, if you look at other countries like South Sudan, 100% debt to GDP. Cape Verde, Mozambique, those guys are overstretched when it comes to borrowing. And then on top of that, they don't have the fiscal fundamentals to backstop it. Japan does, other countries, US does. But other countries like this, they're not able to.
Are you saying we have the fiscal fundamentals?
No, and that's what I was saying before. We don't have the fiscal fundamentals. And the ballooning debt is now starting to get there. Yeah.
Right. And then when we talk about the fiscal fundamentals, the ability to raise this revenue, where is this money going to come from? Because we've talked about the inequality. We've talked about the heavy dependency on the pay-as-you-earn. We also know that indirect tax, when you broaden the base, and you broaden the base, you've got the turnover tax, you've got the presumptive tax, you've got excise duty, you've got VAT, all falling on, in an unequal, in a situation of inequality, falling on the shoulders of the very poor. Then from a human rights perspective, you are then taxing people who aren't able to pay. So, right, we need to broaden the base. But is the problem not that we have borrowed without anticipating how to repay, and now as a knee-jerk solution, we are then saying, let's broaden the base, let's get the money from the most poor who can't. So for me, I think we're in a kind of
tailspin.
Yes.
I don't think because this plan to widen the tax base has been there for a long time. The debt is kind of like the new kid on the block, and that has also been a challenge because National Treasury has not had a well-functioning public debt management office. We've had a lot of people come and go to managing that office, and even the reporting around budgeting has been unclear. So debt has had some challenges, and what has confounded it is when you become middle income, and now we're starting to borrow externally. But the KRA has always had the challenge of not being able to access the tax base. And the when it comes to turnover tax, it comes to presumptive tax. This is the effort to capture more of the informal businesses or the small businesses that are earning at least, I think it's 5 million shillings in turnover for the turnover tax to contribute to paying taxes. Now, I do think that there should be some sort of consideration and some sort of banding where you have, yes, you're earning 5 million, but if you're earning less than a certain amount, then you should be exempt. And so I think that would be a more realistic way of doing things. But on the other side, sorry, Siti, if I could just say one more thing, is that the exemptions that the KRA is giving to many big, high-earning institutions are too much. We're talking about to the extent of 500 billion shillings in exemptions. So, and this was something that was recorded about 2017.
In this country?
Yes, in
so
exemptions.
That's where the
and then we look at the deficit, and then we look at KRA is not able to reach their target. The target they're missing by is about 300 billion. So on one hand, you're exempting 500 billion, and then you fall short on 300 billion. So,
Wangari,
guys,
what you're saying is that they're giving exemptions, and then they're going back to the poorest
and
and taxing them.
No, I would
So
pause.
this is the issue of our campaign.
And the human rights.
Is
and
this
all
one?
those,
The exemption.
So like I said, and my underlying theory from the beginning was the fundamentals and the structure is not right. We need to fix this structure to be able to respond to what is happening.
It's not right. It sounds different from it's wrong.
Yes.
So let's just say our fundamentals are wrong. Senor,
You can say that.
It sounds.
Me, I'll say it in economic language. It is not
you're an
correct.
economist.
I think Wangari will co-opt you as an advisor because you have just given us our public education
That is
message.
needed, absolutely.
That is very straighthtime.
Now, if you look at the public finance management reform,
the
they're
IMF,
thinking about that.
IMF, sorry, just before you. IMF, when, according to the media, the IMF and Treasury are concerned about the 300B deficit. And the proposal was then to get that from reintroducing VAT on the VAT exempt basic goods because it would net the 300B. And in fact, that article said that the IMF is very concerned about this exemption that was put on these goods. Now, when you come here and you tell us that there is actually 500B in exemptions,
That
and we know a
somebody could be
recent
paying.
one, stamp duty on the merger of NIC and CBA, both my banks, right? But that exemption is odious because that's part of these, the revenue shortfalls.
So if you look at the public finance management reform strategy that the country, I think we're in the third phase right now, and I was part of those negotiations, is that part of resolving this issue was, one, to bring more of the informal economy onto the become tax paying, to become formalized, at least in that sense, but also to make sure that exemptions are reduced. Now, the turnover tax and the presumptive tax have been able to come on board from this reform, but it's much harder to get these exemptions because it's harder in the sense that it's shrouded in secrecy, it's opaque, nobody knows who is being given what, and nobody wants, of course, if you're being given a tax break, you're not going to go and say, sir, I've been given a tax break, I would like to rectify, of course not. So the kind of the low-hanging fruit has been to go for the informal reform first, but it's not to say we're saying doing that instead of going for the tax exemptions. It's also in addition. But the tax exemption situation, there are a lot of,
It seems
hands in the batter that make it difficult to
So in theory, we're
implement.
doing both, but in practice, it's going for the easier one. The low-lying fruit is the easier one.
Well, that's how reform works. You try to reform and you do the one that you can do first, and then as you try to figure out the other. But of course, us on the ground, we don't know that. We just know that Sijui turnover tax has come and presumptive tax has come, yet Sijui, these big firms are still enjoying tax exemptions. So
it's clear then, though, that would be the thing. Because again, we say that if people have a fundamental understanding of what is really happening, then it lends credence to the fact that they would then actually be able to open their mouths and say, this is what we realize actually is the situation on the ground, and this then is how we can solve it. Because we've talked about it not being right, it being wrong. At the end of the day, it is not things are not okay. And we see very clearly that we see how people then can enter into this conversation and try and make a change in terms of what is going on, because it cannot continue like this. And if we look at the money that has been borrowed recently, if we look at the last 12 months, we're borrowing money to pay loans. We're not borrowing money to develop the country.
I'm still puzzled.
This is a problem.
These corporations that were given exemptions, was there a specific or special reason? Because I'm sure, KRA is not illogical. What was the thinking? I hope so. What was the thinking behind
state capture?
Well, I wish I could answer that, or I wish I knew who these people being given exemptions were. It really is a big black box. We only know this because it was an estimation given to us by the IMF, and the IMF are privy to some of the information that is provided by Central Bank and the National Treasury. So they're able to make these estimations. But for the rest of us, and the rest of us who are trying to grapple with this issue, it really is a big black box. We don't know who's been giving these exemptions.
So, Wangari, you're talking about, from a point of view of access to information or transparency, Article 35, and in fact, Article 201, because the budget must be transparent, there is information we don't have. IMF has it by virtue of their position. And so when we talk about our first step being declare, and then let us know what is there. Transparency is a big issue. But then from a tax justice point of view as well, informal traders don't have access. The tax justice presupposes that government is giving you a service for the tax that they're demanding. What is government giving informal traders exactly? Because a lot of them don't have trading spaces, don't have access to services. They not only don't have a trading space, they pay for their garbage, they pay for their water, they pay for everything. Right? And then they're taxed.
Yeah. Well, Jira, we've come a long way. And when you start quoting those sections of the Constitution, I remember that we were together when we started doing this whole devolution debate. We've come a long way. And I really appreciate it when I talk to you about these things. Transparency is a huge issue when it comes to Kenya. Even people understanding the right for them to ask for data when it comes to budget, when it comes to revenue. That's still not something that an everyday person realizes that it's a right to have that information. And even if they have that information, what are they going to do with it? Do they have the capacity to understand what is in a budget? Do they have, I'm an economist. I've studied these things. I've looked at budgets until my eyes are bleeding. But sometimes I look at these things and I'm like, I have no idea what you're doing this thing here. It's really complicated. So if I give it to my mom, not that my mom is not educated, my mom is well educated, she won't understand it because she's not an economist, I feel sorry, or I feel stressed for people if I give it to a Mama Mbogo, if I give it to a small trader. How is she going to, even if I give it to her, she's not going to be able to participate in public.
Small bits that are easy to consume.
In morsels.
But that assumes that the people are doing that. There's no requirement in the law that says break it down for people. It just says provide the information.
Breaking down things in this country doesn't work, see?
Here we go.
Actually, it does work.
Our Katiba has never been broken down. Our BBI has not been broken down.
Who's our?
This is broken
BBI is not ours.
Doesn't-
BBI is some of yous.
It doesn't actually.
It's ours, Wajiro. You pay for it.
It's not promulgated.
You pay for it. You own it. 29 minutes to 10 o'clock. Let's take a break, take a look at traffic, and then the conversation continues. And then I'm going to open up the phone lines for you to join the conversation. 0719 012 600.
The 90s have never sounded so good.
Favorite songs of the 1990s.
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Still seem to have some problems on Naivasha Road this morning. Things are actually not moving very well. Of course, this affects the Greater Ngong Road. To be able to see how people can get out, very slowly moving in that direction. So finally, Mombasa Road opens up, moving along swiftly. And so that is available for use. Southern and Eastern Bypass is, of course, still open and moving very, very well. Officially out of traffic hour, so we don't have much problems wherever it is that you look. Unless you see something that we should know about, do let us know. But for now, it's Easy Street everywhere you turn.
The 90s have never sounded so good.
Favorite songs of the 1990s.
Okay, so
94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
12600. This is the situation. We're talking about the national debt in the studio.
Mature, intelligent talk every morning.
I'll get
Spice up yourself. Mornings done right. 94.4 Spice FM, Nairobi.
Yes, IMF's in town in Gary. Negotiations are going on for a special facility for the country. What's that about? What demands should we be making of government of Kenya in this process? And then really, what's the role of citizens around this?
Well, the IMF, they're in town, and usually when they come in town, their first point of, I guess the first point they visit is the central bank. And so IMF are mostly concerned about the macroeconomic context of the country. Are we, what's the situation of our lending, our banks, our stock markets, our, the whole macro fiscal context. So they are coming to assess whether, every year they come and they provide some, areas for improvement, some recommendations, and they come back and they say, well, have you been able to achieve those, what we recommended? Have you implemented them? What's going wrong this time? What's going right? And so them in town is kind of like almost like an audit, an external audit, but also less an audit, but more a capacity building, hand-holding visit or mission in town. So what do we expect? We expect for them to be an objective external eye into what's happening in our economy. If the most of us, whatever we read from CBK or we read, by the way, the central CBK governor is always tweeting. I find his tweets are very interesting, very entertaining. But just if we're not trusting of what the CBK is telling us, then we have an external party to say, well, the CBK is saying this, but we think this, or we agree with this, that going on. So I think for us who are in the macroeconomic space, who deal with this kind of fiscal framework context, it's very interesting for us to understand whether the fundamentals are right, whether we're going in the right direction, an objective external eye.
Right.
So now the public, based on the information that we get from the IMF, then can be able to temper, and say, well, are we in a good space or are we in a bad space? Is business going to be able to grow? Is the central bank providing and the national government providing a context or environment for us to be able to continue growing? Are we in a good place? Are we in a bad place? So it's kind of an objective external eye, so that we can kind of eke out the truth somehow, since everything is opaque.
Right? Guys, let me go to the phone lines. Alan is calling in from Nairobi. Good morning, Alan.
Good morning.
Hello, Alan.
Yeah, the first point I want to make
is
let's not lock ourselves on that exemptions issue.
Mm-hmm.
That exemptions debate has been around for many years, and those exemptions come about because of projects like SGR or projects with loans funded. That's how you get those exemptions. But it is not the problem we're having. Our problem is that the economy is not growing and we're not collecting enough taxes. Now, my second point, do we have a debt crisis? We do. If you want to find out that, go and look at our external debt register. Today it's even on the net.
Mm-hmm.
We are forever borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And where the rubber meets the road is debt to revenues. Forget about those things of IMF, of debt sustainability studies and debt to GDP. Mm-hmm. It's like arguing that I'm right because I have a piece of land in Homer Bay, which costs this, and you put it in your balance sheet, yet you can't pay school fees.
It's true.
Yeah?
It's so true.
We have a big problem. That's today they are saying we are going to the market in a couple of weeks or next month to borrow something that they're calling a green Eurobond. The problem, Rwanda went to the market to borrow a Eurobond. The money was ring-fenced to build an international conference center. Mm-hmm. It was not us, we borrow, we call it budget support, and we spend it. Now, the last point, very last point.
Yes.
You have done a good job at analyzing the state of debt. Now we need to reach a point when we're saying, how do we get out of it?
Right.
My suggestion is the following. there's this new concept brought by UNCTAD called odious debt, which is if you find debt that was used for corruption, Aror Dam, if you use that, then you stick it to this regime. If you look at, you see the one of medical services from China, SGR, all those debts should belong to Uhuru and the DP. And this is what UNCTAD is calling odious debt. Thank you.
Say it again, Alan. Thank you.
Okech in Kisumu. Good morning, Okech.
Good morning, Spice FM.
Good morning.
I had a contribution. I wish to say that I think there is an extent by which the cost of living relates to the national debt. And I think that we must not wait for the ratio to get to 70%. I think any increase in percentage implies something to how we live, the cost of living.
Yep.
So I think we must not necessarily wait until it is 70 or 80 or 90 so that we declare it a crisis. It is a crisis already. And something else I would wish to add is that the composition of our governance, as it is presently constituted, does not show any willingness to sort this issue. I think it depends on we, the commoners, you and me, so that we solve it out. You can very well recall when Raila Odinga wanted power from Uhuru Kenyatta, which he was very hesitant to yield, he mobilized the people, and the people would go to demonstrate every Monday, and somehow it yielded results. According to me, the public ought to wake up. I think we have views and opinions about these things, but all we do is tweet about them. And I also believe that there are various frameworks, checks and balances, which ensures that these things are done transparently and in the right way. Now, we will not continue relying on court orders because we have seen instances, I think there are so many, that the government does not intend to take court orders.
Right.
When one of us is exiled and there's a court order about it, we go back to Twitter and tweet. When the currencies were given with a portrait of a president, all we could say is that we have no problem with the money. It's not about the money, it is about the rule of law.
Right. Thank you very much,
so
Okech. Asante sana and have a good day. 0719-012-600. It's a contribution that would like you to have on this particular conversation. So your reactions to those two phone calls?
So the gentleman mentioned that we shouldn't worry about exemptions because it's been happening for a long time. I would beg to differ. It's been happening for a long time, and this is why we're here now. We need to rectify it. We can't just say, imefanyika. No, that's not going to happen. That is why we're here today.
He's saying some of it is also pegged on the kind of borrowing that we've made.
Yes, exactly, and that's what we were talking about. If you get into commercial borrowing, but you see now SGR was some of this thing is government to government, right?
Yep.
And government to government actually is not even on the books. Right? These government-to-government special contracts are not on the books. We have no eye towards them, to what's happening on this kind of these arrangements between China and Kenya. Which is why we always keep saying, can't you share this information with us?
Before you go on, shouldn't there be an eye as to what really, because we talked about transparency and looking at what really is the state. Because with people, because if people are ignorant, it's not necessarily by choice, because in this point, the information is not being shared. Shouldn't it be? Shouldn't there be
definitely
an eye?
It should definitely be shared, but nobody is really there's no requirement. You always see in the paper you need to share, but where is the actual impetus? Where does the rubber hit the road? Where do you require and make these people share? Sometimes we have legislation. We are a country full of beautiful laws, but we implement some and stick by them thoroughly, and others were just like, it was in this clause, and you kind of forget, you kind of brush it under the rug. So the rule of law, of course, I think is very wanting.
Can we actually get out of debt?
I think we can. I think if we have good leaders who are making sure that we are getting into have a good fiscal framework and getting into positive debt that is manageable, debt that will invest in infrastructure or whatever it is that will help repay back that debt. Because the other thing is we're borrowing, but you think we're not the ones paying. there are children and their children's children that are going to be the ones paying. Now, if we're making an investment that's saying this infrastructure is going to help our children's children pay for this debt, then, then we're getting somewhere there. But if we're getting into just debt that's paying for salaries, debt that's paying for recurrent expenditures that doesn't generate additional revenue, then we're in big problems. And we're seeing some effect of that's happening in Kenya, where that debt is actually going to finance recurrent expenditure, salaries. We have a huge wage bill for operations and maintenance, and this is where the big challenge lies.
Do you know of any situation in Kenya where a bad debt has been turned into a good debt?
Individually? Well, when I borrowed,
public debt.
I wouldn't be able to say. I think Kenya does have a framework to do it. We just need to make sure that the fiscal fundamentals, I keep going back to that our taxes are well thought out, that we have reliable budgets, that we're able to invest debt properly in development rather than in recurrent. If we have those fundamentals correct, then we can say, yes, we're going in the right direction. That's the same, we talked about Japan earlier. Japan, they are, how many, is it 300? I don't know what the figure was, percent debt to GDP. But they have very strong economies. They have a huge industrial economy that they're able to repay on their debt. So, the fiscal fundamentals really matter.
Wangari, we hear you. You're talking about good leadership and fiscal fundamentals.
A lot of
we
ifs.
hear
A lot
you.
of ifs,
We hear what you can't say. Good leadership, fiscal fundamentals. That's what we need. My question is around pensions. This has emerged as a big issue in terms of in terms of a big budgetary item, and pensions seem to be growing. What can be done? Because we're asking what can be done about debt. So maybe in terms of solutions, what does the government need to do to deal with the pressure coming from pensions, which is contributing to the demands on revenue as opposed to service delivery?
I think growing pensions is a big concern. But if you allow me to compare possibly what's happening in Kenya and other countries, so I keep going back to Japan because we had done some work looking at the state of Japan. Japan, they have an aging population. They have no young people there. Practically no young people. If you look at their demographic chart, it's wide at the top where you have very old people, and then it's really thin at the bottom where you have young people. So they have a burgeoning pension bill, but nobody to repay it. Us, on the other hand, we have a burgeoning pension bill, but we have a strong young network to finance it.
Yep.
Challenge is, are we resourcing our younger population to be able to get to contribute to the economy by having businesses, by jobs. And jobs and things like that will help to backstop the growing pension challenge that we're having in the country.
So in other words, our development priorities are misaligned.
We are putting all of our eggs in one basket. The Big Four is an important vision for ourselves. But if we put all our resources and all our debt borrowing and everything in that, and leave unemployment, we leave job creation, access to credit alone, then it's really imbalanced.
We should thank God we have eggs.
There've been proposals. Under the present budget to definance or deprioritize the Big Four agenda because government has to make trade-offs in terms of budget priorities. What would you say to that?
I would say they're good. They're 4 pillars. Manufacturing is where the low-hanging fruit lies because that's where we can have a little bit more quick turnaround. Things like food security, universal health care, and I forget what
housing.
the other, and housing may be longer-term investments, but that may not immediately they don't have a direct effect on the economy, but they have indirect effect in the fact that you have a young, healthy population that's food secure. Housing.
At 13 minutes to 10 o'clock, I'm going to open up the phone lines again, 0719 12600. So we'll take 2 more calls to discuss this. Good morning.
.1 Spice FM. Kisi. Spice FM, Nyeri.
Family is where it all happens. The highs and the lows, the cries and the laughter, the good times and the bad times. We are
Straight to
family,
the phone lines.
and from us
This
to you,
is Sami
we give
in
you
Magarini. Good morning,
the
Sami.
very best of wholesome television entertainment.
Morning, Sami.
KTN.
Yes,
Welcome
morning.
home.
Yes, we can
KTN
hear you. Go
Home,
ahead.
Good morning.
available on DSTV channel 272.
You're breaking
Zuku
up,
channel
Sami. Sami, we
12,
can't hear you
Go
now.
TV channel 92 and Bamba
Please call again
channel 1.
0719-012-600. That's 0719-012-600. In the Situation Room this morning is Wagari Muikia. She is an economist from Expertise Global Consulting. Then we have Peter, who's now on the line in Nairobi. Peter, good morning.
Yes, Eric, how are you?
We're fine, thank you.
Now, Eric,
Yes.
for Kenyans don't understand one thing. I just want to conclude this.
Mm-hmm.
Borrowing is not a mistake. You know, every time we borrow, Kenyans think it's a mistake. The economic is telling us we are at 60%. For us to do all these things that people see us doing until we come to a level where we are called a middle income country, we must borrow. As long as our figures, we are not above 70. Me, I don't see any problem. I don't know where people think this first world to where it is, or country like South Korea. It is you borrow and you invest. When you do this, you come to where other people are. Can you imagine right now, Mr. Eric, we are doing 100% transition to primary school, to secondary school. We need all these things to do. We need money to do all these things. We are a third world country. We must borrow. I do not have a problem with borrowing. I do not have a problem with borrowing as long as it is not above 70 or 5%. I'm hearing even somebody saying that we should go to the streets with placards to bring problem about borrowing.
Yes.
Where will you get the figures which even the economists in the studio that they even have? What
Peter,
will you go and tell people? Yes.
Peter, so yes, you don't have a problem with borrowing, and I think we all agree.
And
Nobody
he's
has
not
a
coming
problem
to
with
the
borrowing. Do you have a problem with the management of the money that has been borrowed?
Exactly. That's a very good question. The goodness is, when this money came so much, there was a lot of corruption. But I'm very happy that right now, there is so much being done about corruption. You see, even in a church when there's a lot of sadaka, you see a lot of sin in that church.
These things you
These
say
things
that are being
done
done.
about corruption, where are they?
No, right now you can see something being done about corruption. It's not like that kind of
Something like?
government.
Something like?
People are being
Like Rotich in court.
Rotich is out.
One,
Many people are out of their job. Yeah, you cannot compare right now at the time of Moi. We can see something. You look at what Kinot is doing, we can see something.
There's
Kenya
movement.
makes a lot of noise, even when their country is doing well.
Oh, brother, we are doing badly. We are limping. we are on crutches.
Peter
Oh,
Peter and
Peter, do you live in this country?
Peter and the people he knows is
We are not doing bad. You have Kenyans have a lot of noise where you can't even sometimes you can't even see where the noise is.
Wow, okay.
Yes, we make a lot of. I have read. You can look at countries like America. Read the history of America from 1700 to where they are right now. They go through these things to be where they are right now. We
They
must
borrowed.
borrow. Yes.
But borrowing, I agree, Peter, is good. But when you say we are doing well as a country, what do you mean?
I mean, for example, look at people in Ethiopia coming to do KCP in Kenya. Yes. Well, compare yourself with the countries around you. Just compare yourself. Are we doing bad?
We are doing horribly.
it depends on
Why are you
what
being called?
compare.
Right now, Kenya is ranking number 3 after South Africa and Nigeria. Are you doing like countries like Somalia?
No, we are
Why
not.
don't you appreciate what you are doing? Why do you make so much noise sometimes on borrowing when you are at 60%? I'm very happy you have an economist in the studio. Only this discussion only makes sense when an economist comes into play, and I'm very happy what you've done for that.
Right.
But when you leave Kenya to just talk without an economist, they just talk their own thing.
Peter, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now, Wangari, the economist, at this point,
Yes.
because I think we've kind of danced around this over and over again. With the current state of things, where are we? Are we in a good place or a bad place? The way in which we're looking at it now.
Honestly speaking.
I mean, as it is.
I mean, I'll say it again the way I said it before. I think where I would say where our crisis is if we pass where the limits that we put for ourselves. Our limit that we put ourselves is 70. The fact that we are fast approaching that 70 should be of concern, and we should put in place measures to dial back on that, getting to that level. So I think we could be heading there if we don't fix our fiscal fundamentals now. But I wouldn't say that we're in a crisis.
There's
right
a tsunami coming.
Are you happy? Are you happy with my? Are you happy with my response?
The percentage.
I get what exactly you're saying.
Yeah,
you're saying we are not yet at crisis level.
That's my view.
But
yes.
the percentage isn't even the real issue here, is it really? Japan is at 237%. Okay? It isn't the percentage. It's the other factors that are related to our borrowing and, as you put it correctly, the management of our fiscal affairs.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not just a percentage.
Don't we, Wangari?
Let's not get confused with this percentage.
Wangari, don't we have to look at the standards of living for the average Kenyan dropping? Don't we have to look at what is being done with this money that's actually being borrowed? Then for us to be able to translate and say where we are on this thermometer of good or bad. Really, don't we have to look at those factors?
That's a fiscal management she's
and,
talking about.
And maybe just building on that, the question that we can ask you is what, in your view, is the impact of debt on the economy, on the growth of on employment, on the cost of living?
Well, where the challenge does come when we look, and we always go back to the fundamentals. If we're using a lot of the revenues that we're raising to pay debt instead of having a situation where you have a low, like Japan, where they only have 5% of their revenues that's going to debt, then now we are of concern because we are reducing our ability to finance our budgetary needs by 40% actually going to pay debt. And that 40% is paying domestic and external debt. So it also matters how much external debt we have, because of that 40%, possibly a large proportion of that 40% is going externally, which doesn't help our country. If it's internally, that is a little bit different because it helps with liquidity and the fiscal fundamentals are a little bit different.
A country like Japan, if someone seeks health care, it will be available for literally all the citizenry. In this country, if I'm to go by what was said by Dr. Gitai of AMREF, 3 out of 10 Kenyans, all right, only 3 out of 10 are able to access what you may call reasonable health care. The others will be afraid to access health care because of the costs attached to it. That's just one statistic. If you're talking about the numbers of people who have 1 million, they're not because of choice, but because they have no option. If you look at other economic indicators, we are doing really badly because these are the sort of things we shouldn't even be talking about.
In the first place, absolutely.
Yes.
Do you know there was one of the callers did mention, he said, we forget about what IMF, we don't care about IMF. I don't agree with that because if something happened and we did enter into full crisis mode and we are not able to repay our debts and we're not able to finance our budget, who is going to bail us out? Who do you think we're going to call? The first person, caller number one, IMF. Because that's what happened. Because even what happened with Greece, what happened with Greece when they defaulted on the loan, the Troika came in, the European Commission, European Bank and the IMF came in to support, to lift up the economy, the Greek economy. And what did they do? They said you have to slash your budget. You have to reform your taxes, which is what we should be doing right now.
They did.
And they did. Yes. They had to, because if they're going to get this money, what are they? The rules are there. The conditionalities are there for the bailout. We don't want to get there. We have an opportunity to now make sure our budget is strong, make sure that we're doing program-based budgeting, which we are not, but make sure that the taxes that we're raising match the budgets that we are
in a crisis
deciding.
Or are the people we've tasked with managing our financial matters taking us to a crisis?
We need proper management. That's definite. We have a public debt management office, which is headed by One Haron Sirima. He's a former central bank officer. And I'm hoping that he's going to turn around the office because we've not had anybody. We've had people in acting capacity.
Is there political goodwill to ensure to have that office working?
And Wangari, can I ask, even as we put in the budget office, and much as we are very unhappy with the role of Treasury in this, Parliament is the oversight institution. They are the ones who approve the recommendations coming out from Treasury. And they have allowed us to get into this position. Is that in itself not a crisis in terms of the safeguards aren't there? The political will really, actually the problem is the governance and the political will around it. The fiscal fundamentals,
it's also what Peter Wanyama said.
The indicators.
Our inability to make rational decisions on who leads us.
It goes back to what we're talking about, management, which is why I was talking about the debt management office. This whole, what's happening with the National Treasury, the different leadership that's coming in place, people are being fired, people are being brought in. That is very challenging for a country like ours who are engaging in extensive debt. Looking for debt externally and internally. We need clear, strong, focused, stable leadership at the National Treasury to be able to enable us to borrow responsibly, to have a long-term vision for our borrowing, and to make sure that the borrowing that we do engage in is put in the right place.
Wangari, should we increase capital gains tax and corporation tax? Just yes or no?
No.
Should we increase those taxes, capital gains and corporation tax?
If it makes sense.
Because there were proposals that were then taken off the table, and the argument is that instead of taxing the big corporations, we're going back to the mwananchi. So should
that's a political economy thing, because who has a power to lobby and say you don't want to be taxed?
In your view, and maybe comparative to other countries, are these corporations and paying sufficient capital tax and corporation tax?
I think where it should be revisited, but the fact still remains that there's a large percentage of the economy that's not contributing to the tax. So we need to make sure that it's well balanced.
Wangari, thank you very much for coming. Your final comment in 30 seconds.
I would say in order to make sure that we, I think to manage the debt, we need to do three things.